Hello, 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 hello. Welcome once again to, not a Prog Reborn. This is my continued look at the Final Fantasy Cross Magic the Gathering collaboration. There have been about a week-ish worth of spoilers since we last looked in. So I wanted to catch up on what's been spoiled, talk about both the cards primarily from a Magic the Gathering perspective, but also, any sort of references that the cards might be making, who these characters are, things like that as well. My name is M. Kosler. I am a longtime Magic the Gathering player and a semi-hardcore, semi-casual, I don't know where you'd actually put me on the spectrum of Final Fantasy enjoyer. I have played many of the mainline series to completion. The most that I've spent on the series, however, has been Final Fantasy XIV, which is where this channel, about a year ago was primarily focused on a replay through Final Fantasy XIV. And so I have pretty good knowledge of, the mechanics of Magic the Gathering, a pretty good understanding of, how the power level of particular cards. Obviously, everybody, even the pros, make misevaluations or miss certain pieces or overvaluate cards. I'm no pro, but I am a consistent Mythic player on Magic the Gathering Arena, the digital client, and I do have some as a standard player, and I do have some commander experience. So should be able to talk primarily about the cards from those situations. I think for the most part, when I'm going to be evaluating these, I'm going to be thinking about them from standard, but if there's any cards that fit into any particular decks that I have in Commander, I'll talk about those. I don't know the full depth and breadth of what is out there for Commander, so if you're wanting a much more in-depth Commander look at some of these cards, there are plenty of other channels, MTG Goldfish, Command Zone, etc., that can talk about where these cards might fit in for other strategies. I believe that's all I need to do to talk about for setup here. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's make sure that we've got a good view here. So this is cards since, I forget when I last did my stream. It might have been last Tuesday as well. Though it might have been a little bit later after that. I'm not 100% sure. So this is going to be cards that have been spoiled since my last stream, either Tuesday or Wednesday last week. We're not going to be going over any of the cards that are in the Through the Ages. We might take a look at them, but they're all reprints, so I'd really only be talking about like reprint value and whether I think the art is good. So yeah, I don't think there's anything more to say. We can start with Edelbert Steiner. For 1 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Human Knight, at uncommon. He is a 2/1 with lifelink, and Steiner gets +1/+1 for each equipment you control. So Steiner's a decent body. A 2/1 for 2 You know, not anything to write home about, but does have lifelink, which is nice. If you can get any equipment onto the battlefield early enough, say before you go and swing, so whether you're playing Steiner, whether you have some one-drop equipment, or you're playing Steiner, you play Steiner and then play some 3-drop equipment. If you can get them to a 3-2 for 2, essentially, with lifelink, that's a decent body. Anything that you can go beyond that is obviously gonna get much better. We still really haven't seen a ton of super playable equipment, but you do have to keep in mind that all of the job select cards that we see, which come along with a body, anything that's 4 Mirrodin that is still existing in standard. I don't believe that there's any living weapon cards in standard, but I could be wrong. Those are essentially creatures that have equipment attached to them. There are some other equipment that see sort of random play. Primarily Corey Steelcutter is the obvious one, but sometimes you see cards like Assimilation Aegis in Azorius Battlefront decks. That's technically an equipment. So there's little, you know, eating around the edges. There are some playable equipment out there that could make Steiner a little more interesting. I think for the most part, he's kind of signpost uncommon-y, if you're for draft, if you're looking to be in sort of an aggressive equipment strategy, Steiner, and you see Steiner in a pack, you know that people are going to be passing you those equipment. As far as who this is one of your main party members in Final Fantasy IX. He's the captain of the guard for... It's not Lindblum. It's not Burmecia. It's whatever the name of the main town, the where you start the game, is in Final Fantasy IX. He sort of tags along, or he gets inadvertently kidnapped with Garnet at the very beginning. He sort of jumps on the ship as it's leaving away. So he stays with the crew, trying to lead Garnet back to the castle, but you know, things happen along the way, and he eventually joins with the cause, more or less. A well-loved character. When you are controlling Steiner in the game, as he's running around, he's got this like oversized, rusty set of armor, and so he's all clank, 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 clank as you're running around with the character. A pretty well-loved character. Next up, we have another bird. So if you've been watching any of the streams that I've been doing when I'm going through this, I've been saying keep an eye out for birds in the set, because I do think that there are quite a few powerful birds that have already been spoiled, and so if there's enough bird synergy, then there might just be a whole deck that they're trying to make for people who get into Magic the Gathering either primarily or their first steps are through this set. So we have Ambrosia Whiteheart for 1 and a white. We have a legendary creature bird at uncommon. She is a 2/2 that has flash. When Ambrosia Whiteheart enters, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. And she has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, Ambrosia Whiteheart gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Most of the chocobos that we've seen in the set have some sort of landfall or land synergy. So Ambrosia here is no exception. Synergizes, or seems like it would fit pretty well in either Azorius or not Azorius, Orzhov or Asper, or any sort of black-white X pixie deck, which has been either at the forefront of the meta or tier 1.5, tier 1, definitely still tier 1 in the meta, but not the deck to beat anymore. I wouldn't think. The big problem here with Ambrosia into one of those decks is Ambrosia is legendary, so the game plan behind one of those decks is you're trying to, play some, enchantment or artifact or something that has some enter the battlefield effect that you can then, or creature that you can then pick back up with something like Ambrosia or something like, or something like Sunpearl Kirin or something like Nurturing Pixie, so that you can then replay it again. But you're really wanting to play many copies of that card, and one of the game plans is you can kind of rush your opponent down by just constantly picking back up a Hopeless Nightmare, replaying the Hopeless Nightmare, attacking with the Pixie that picked it up, then instep, pick it up on their instep, pick it up again with a Sunpearl Kirin, recast it again, hit for 6 because Hopeless Nightmare dealt 2 damage. With Ambrosia being legendary, sure, you can do that with Ambrosia, but anytime that you're playing an additional copy of Ambrosia, you're going to lose the other copies of it. So I could possibly see this if you are specifically in Orzhov, because if you're not in Orzhov, you have Fear of Isolation as your third version of this pickup strategy, third version of this pickup creature. But if you're specifically in Orzhov, you might play a couple copies of Ambrosia. But I think more you're one to play Ambrosia in some sort of bird strategy, something where you're not necessarily wanting to do this over and over and over again. You're kind of using Ambrosia as mostly as protection for other creatures that you have, protect them from a removal spell. Sure, you can get a re-enter the battlefield effect. Note that you can pick up a land that you control, so that if you have, turn 1 Zaz's Chocobo, turn 2 land, or turn 3, play a land, play Ambrosia, don't have a land drop in hand, but need a way to get another landfall trigger, you can pick up those lands and replay them. So a little bit more interesting mechanics from Ambrosia, but I think being legendary is going to be the big problem here for Ambrosia, for the deck that you would think that she would immediately slot into. But again, keep in mind that it's a bird. This is definitely a playable bird. So as more and more playable birds come around, think about whether you can play Bant birds. As far as the reference here, this is Clive's Chocobo from way back, or yeah, this is Clive's Chocobo that he had when he was young, the events of FF16 happen. You eventually re-find Ambrosia later on, and you can see that Ambrosia's got the eye patch because it lost its eye due to events that happen in the story. Next up, we have Dwarven Castle Guard. For 1 on a white, we have a creature Dwarf Soldier at common. It's a 2/1 that when this creature dies, create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token. Lollyho is the Dwarven greeting. So this is mostly draft chaff. It's, any one of these, dies, creates something, another creature, good for sacrifice synergy, sacrifice value. At 2 mana, it's a little too expensive for standard play. We have Infestation Sage and Nesting Bot that basically do the same thing at 1 mana. If there is any kind of weird hero synergy, then maybe there's something there, but I think 2 is probably too much. As far as the reference here, are the dwarves on the moon? No, it's the Loporrits who are on the moon. The naming ways that are on the moon. The dwarves are underground in FF4. And they all look like this. They've all got those beards. I mostly know the dwarves from Final Fantasy XIV, being on the first, having the beards, all that stuff, doing lolly-ho, all that. So fun reference there, even if you're not don't have a ton of familiarity with FF4. You probably recognize these characters from FF14. Next up, we have From Father to Son. For 1 on a white, we have a sorcery at rare, and it says search your library for a vehicle card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, put that card onto the battlefield instead, then shuffle, and it has a flashback cost of 4 white. So in standard, there are a number of vehicles from Aether Drift that see play. There are Lumbering World Wagon, Debris Beetle, things like that. I'm trying to think of there's the schooner from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that's pretty good. What other vehicles see play in standard? There's a couple of vehicles that saw some play in Gruul Exhaust, when that sort of had its blip on the radar during Aether Drift. And then Final Fantasy brings along the Prima Vista. I can't think of a ton of other. I think maybe there's Phantom Train, and then the Regalia get a card. I can't remember. There's not a ton of playable vehicles. There's the big Valor flagship card from Aether Drift, which if you're flashing this card back and bringing it onto the battlefield immediately, then that's a decent play, but is the Valor flagship that powerful of a card that you need to jump through these hoops of getting this into your graveyard, then paying 7 to bring it on. That's basically, I think the cost of that card is 7 already. Sure, you're tutoring it tutoring it directly onto the battlefield versus having to find it and play it. I think for the most part, this is going to be a staple card in Commander for vehicle decks that are in white. It's a demonic tutor in 4 vehicles, so it's going to see play for the rest of time as long as people are playing vehicle decks. Couple of interesting things to note. So it just says if the spell was cast from a graveyard. So you don't, it's got its flashback cost in there, but if you have some other way to cast this cheaper from a graveyard, you know, Snapcaster it, something like that, then you would still be able to search, you'd still be able to search it, the card, the vehicle immediately put onto the battlefield instead of into your hand. Those scenarios seem pretty good. You know, you play this, find some you know, other vehicle, then you Snapcaster from father to son, cast it from a graveyard, then get the big vehicle afterwards. I don't know if there are any like Snapcaster vehicles. I'd have to really look. I don't think so off the top of my head. They have to specifically be cards that cast from the graveyard, so you can't really Shiko this, because Shiko exiles the card and allows you to cast a copy. So you're not casting it from the graveyard, you're casting it from exile. So they need to be written in a way like either the teamer, like Harmonize Snapcaster Mage, or literal Snapcaster Mage, to get that trigger. But that is an interesting play that you can do with from father to son. Don't really think it's that viable in standard because there's not some big heavy hitter vehicle, but it might be something in Pioneer. You know, they're the Greasefang decks that are trying to get out Parhelion. If you have some way to cheat casting from father to son directly from the graveyard, then there's your shot. But yeah, as far as the reference, I haven't played 15 at all, nor have I really watched a ton. I know the regalia because it's a mount that you can get in Final Fantasy XIV, and you know, the depiction's fairly straightforward. King Dad giving to new King Noctis the regalia to go on the bachelor party, the bachelor trip, boys night out. But yeah. Next up we have Machinist's Arsenal. For 4 and a white, we have an artifact equipment at rare. This has a job select, so this is our first example of job select. We've talked a little bit about what job select is already, but what it is: when this equipment enters, create a 1/1 colorless hero creature token, then attach this to it. And then equipped creature gets +2/+2 for each artifact you control and is an artificer in addition to its other types. And it has Machina, which is just the name for its equip cost, which is equip cost of 4. So 5 mana for what is ultimately just a big fella. If this is your only equipment on the battlefield, or if this is your only artifact on the battlefield, it's 5 mana for 3/3. Sorry, no, that's right. It doesn't care about artificers. That's Sid that cares about artificers. Yeah. It's 5 mana for 3/3. Obviously, if you have any other artifacts on the battlefield, then this can get very large, but it is ultimately just a large machinist here. And at 5 mana, you can probably be doing better things with your mana, in standard at least. You know, if you're in some sort of, if if you're in, like, I wouldn't play this in Azorius Battlefront decks because this doesn't get hit by Battlefront. I know they play some of them play some copies of cards that don't get hit by Battlefront, like Thousand Mood Smithy or Mightstone and Weakstone, but I think both of those cards are probably better than Machinist Arsenal. And another big mark against Machinist Arsenal is if your opponent is able to kill the creature that the Machinist Arsenal is attached to, the job select creature, that's a lot of mana to re-equip it. So there are a number of other cards, job select cards, that have much cheaper re-equip costs. This one, 4 to re-equip. You're basically taking your whole turn just to move this onto somebody else. Sure, if your deck's built around it, maybe moving this onto somebody else is going to win you the game. But I really think that there's better things that you can be doing at 5 mana. As far as the reference, so not all job select cards are direct references to Final Fantasy XIV, but they all, I believe, have been jobs that you can pick in Final Fantasy XIV, even if they're technically referencing like FF1 or FF2. This one's Machinist is technically kind of what the job of Edgar is, and we might be talking about Edgar later on in this stream. But the depiction here is very much the depiction of a Final Fantasy XIV Machinist. You can see the robot that you summon, Queen's Blade. No, that's from Bosha. It's Queen's something that you summon in the background there. You also see the drone that you get from earlier. When you're lower level in Machinist before you get upgraded to this here. I don't remember what this exact weapon is here, whether it is like Air Anchor. It kind of looks like Air Anchor. I mean, that's what I would think that an Air Anchor might look like. So maybe that's what they're going for here. But cool reference. Speaking of more job select cards and references to Final Fantasy XIV jobs, we have Paladin's Arms for 2 and a white. We have an artifact equipment at common. It has job select, and equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has ward 1. And as a knight in addition to its other types. So they don't really talk about what ward means here, because I guess they've moved it to an evergreen keyword, but ward just means if you attempt to target the creature, because it's the equipped creature that's getting this. If you attempt to target the creature that this Paladin's Arms is attached to, you have to pay an additional 1 generic mana. Otherwise, the spell that you're using, the spell that you're targeting that creature with, is countered. If an opponent is doing this, you can do it for yourself for free. You can target your own creature for free. But if an opponent is trying to target your creature, they have to pay an additional 1 or have their spell get countered. As far as standard playability, 3 mana, 3/2, ward 1. That's not really standard playable. This is basically draft chaff out there. Oh, and I forgot to mention the equip cost is 4, so another very expensive equip cost. And this one, you're not even really getting a lot of value here. Technically, this is something that you can hit off of United Battlefront, but you don't want to be hitting this off of United Battlefront. So look elsewhere for cards to play in standard. far as the reference here, we have Paladin using Passage of Arms, which is one of the tank cooldowns that you have in Final Fantasy XIV. I don't know the exact gear set. This kind of looks... A lot of Paladin gear ends up looking pretty similar. I know you sort of get this diadem crown thing from the Realm Reborn quests. The cloak kind of reminds me of... This might be the Endwalker set, because that's... The cloak reminds me of the cloak that you see on the main character stand-in the Endwalker opening cutscene. But I can't tell you for certain. Next up, a pretty spicy card and pretty standard playable. We have Summon Knights of Round, not Knights of the Round, Knights of Round. For 6 white. We have a enchantment creature, Saga Knight, at Mythic. It is a 3/3 with Indestructible, and it has 5 chapters. So being a summon, it's a Saga creature. So 5 chapters. The first 4 chapters are the exact same. Summon 3 2/2 white knight creature tokens. And then when you get to chapter 5, which is when Knights of Round will be sacrificed, and because it's being sacrificed, it still dies even though it has Indestructible, because sacrificing something gets around indestructibility. If you're new to Magic, that's one of the ways that you can kill something that has Indestructible. But when you do get to chapter 5, other creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn, and put an Indestructible counter on each of them. I think from the standard perspective, you're not... The game's probably going to be over before you get to Ultimate End. And if the game isn't over before you get to Ultimate End, and it'll probably end at that point. So this whole, put an Indestructible counter on all your creatures, you have this big overrun. You're really playing this card, if you do play this, for the fact that it is a 3/3 Indestructible that immediately spits out a bunch of other creatures. So you're going to get a total of, 9 power spread across 4 bodies as soon as this enters the battlefield. So the primary place that I think people are thinking about this card is in Reanimator strategies. It's something that you can Abuelo's Awakening, but it's also a creature, so you can just straight up zombify it. So if you can get this out on turn 4, you get, like we just said, 9 power across 3 bodies. Pretty difficult for many decks to deal with. Even though it's a 3/3, something like a Temporary Lockdown's not going to sweep up Knights of the Round. It'll sweep up your tokens, but it won't. But you'll just generate 3 more afterward. So they really have to deal with the Indestructible Knight, and because it's generating these 3 tokens, unless they can't really use like a Liliana or a Sheoldred's Edict or something to really kill the Knights of Round, because you can just sacrifice one of the Knights. The big issue is Nowhere to Run is in Standard, and while it is seeing far less play than it was, before Tarkir came out, giving things minus X is another way to get around indestructibility. I would have loved to see this card with 4 toughness, so that this would dodge Nowhere to Run as well and make it much more difficult to deal with. So this is a obviously a pretty sick reanimation target. Is it better than Atraxa? Is it better than the recent Atali? The argument's there. I don't think it's better than Atraxa. I think that you can probably argue about whether it's better than Atali. And it's definitely on the same level, I think, as like Valgavoth. As Valgavoth. Now, there's a bunch of other great reanimation targets in this exact set that you might, this or Primal Bahamut, this or, I guess, it's not Primal Bahamut, it's just Bahamut. This or Bahamut, this or Sin, this or Arden, stuff like that. But you have a plethora of options for reanimation to choose from, and I think this is a pretty good one. As far as just generic casting it, oh, and I should mention, this, since this is an enchantment, this works well with the standard Yuna, to get it out of the graveyard. Now, actually casting it, there are some either Selesnya ramp or domain or mono white Ugin decks that already get up to 7. Getting up to 8 isn't that much more. So maybe you see like one copy of those in the main, or maybe this is just like a sideboard juke for if you think that your opponent's going to be bringing in a lot of Planeswalker removal, and so you go, hey, I'm going to take out all my Ugins and put in Knights of the Rounds or whatever. So possibly get this played in some sort of ramp strategy. But I think you're mostly going to see this from reanimation, and I think this is a pretty cool reanimation target. As far as the reference, anyone who's played Final Fantasy VII knows this. Knows this summon. Takes 2 minutes or so to get through. The reference, you're summoning, what is that, 12 knights to go with the king here. King Arthur here, or King Thordan from the FF14 version of Knights of the Round and the Heaven's Word. I think it was pretty obvious that they were going to print a card for this, and this is a pretty splashy effect for this, and pretty playable in my opinion. On to more summons, and more and more uncommon summons, which is nice for draft. Though this could be standard playable. Let's take a look. Summon Primal Garuda. For 3 and a white, we have a enchantment creature, Saga Harpy, at uncommon. It is a 3/3 with flying, and it's chapter 1, so on ETB. It has Aerial Blast. This creature deals 4 damage to target tapped creature an opponent controls. And then the next 2 chapters are the exact same. Slipstream. Another target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains flying until end of turn. That's that for chapter 3 when it goes away. So 4 mana 3/3. That's on the not really there in standard, but a 4 mana 3/3 that potentially Flame Tongue Kavu's a creature, possibly standard playable. We saw, way back in the day, Ravenous Chupacabra as a 4 mana card that destroyed a creature your opponent controls, as very playable. It has to be a tapped creature an opponent controls, so sometimes you're just gonna whiff, and if this isn't killing something, then this is a 4-mana 3/3 flyer, and that's pretty rough. Probably not standard playable, but borderline. If this was a bird, that'd be nice, rather than a harpy. But I think this is probably a bomb in limited. 4-mana 3/3 flyer that FTKs likely something of your opponents, unless it's just been a huge board stall, and then having whatever your best ground creature be able to jump in the air and start swinging in as a flyer for the next 2 turns alongside Garuda for one of those turns. Seems like a great way to swing a board in your favor. So I think this is probably a very, very good card in limited. As far as the reference, this is the Final Fantasy XIV version of Garuda. Not much else to say there. It looks exactly like the card that you see in 14. The name of the spells are, or the name of the effects are spells that it casts during the trial, during the ultimate, all over the place. So next up, we have the Wind Crystal. So they showed us the Darkness Crystal at the PAX panel, I believe, and today they released all the remaining crystals, or they spoiled all the remaining crystals. So we're going to see a bunch of them here. So there's one per color. Here we have the Wind Crystal. Interestingly, this is white for a legendary artifact at rare. So all of these, from what I remember looking at them briefly, are 4-mana artifacts, legendary artifacts that reduce the cost of spells of its color by 1, and then have some other effect, and then some 6-mana activated ability. So white spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If you would gain life, gain twice that much life instead. And then for 4 white and tap the Wind Crystal, creatures you control gain flying and lifelink until end of turn. Standard playability, I don't see it. It's 4 mana to not impact the board. Only is doubling your life total. If you have a board and get to 6 mana, the activated ability is probably either going to win you the game or probably put it out of reach against like an aggressive opponent. But even against anyone who's trying to play a little bit more of a value game, that just one big swing in is probably not going to be enough. You can keep using this over and over again, but this isn't really protecting your creatures. This isn't ending the game itself. You have to have a board to be able to do something with it. So, people who love life gain strategies are salivating at a card like this. And there are pretty good life gain strategies in standard right now, but this isn't like providing extra triggers for your essence channelers or turning your life gain into damage or anything like that. This is very much a what often is a new player trap of if I gain enough life, my opponent can't win, and that rarely is the case. As far as commander side, life gain strategies could possibly see play in here. The reduced mana cost is pretty good from a commander perspective, right? It's still 4 mana there, but generally commander is slower than your 60 card formats, and you have more time to set up, and so you'll be able to gain more value off of the mana cost reduction. But that's really where this card lives. Next up, we have as far as the reference here, let me go back. The reference here, I have not played much at all of Final Fantasy III, so I don't have a ton to say about this. Crystals themselves are prominent throughout Final Fantasy. And I know in 3 they play an even bigger role, but beyond that, I can't really tell you. So now, back to You're Not Alone. For a single white, we have an instant at common. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And if you control 3 or more creatures, it gets +4/+4 until end of turn instead. Pretty much a limited combat trick. 1 mana gives something +2/+2. Often in limited, you're going to have many creatures on the board because it's much harder to keep a board under wraps in check in limited. So this being a 1 mana +4/+4 is nice, but it's a combat trick. You're not getting any trample or anything. You're just going to use this for surprise killing your opponent's blocker, win trades, stuff like that. Referencing here, it's been so long. I've played 9. It's been so long since I have played 9 that I don't remember exactly where this is. I think if I remember, there's a moment where you're kind of fighting in this sort of like gladiatorial, or you're like trying to, Zidane which is the character at the very foreground with the blonde hair, is trying to like go it alone because he's learned something about his origins or what have you, and the rest of the party that you have along with you sort of starts joining up with the party, or joining up with you as you're fighting increasingly difficult monsters. And so and I believe this is the name of a track, You're Not Alone. It's been so long since I played FF9 that I don't know the exact reference, but I think I have it close to right. The art's great. We see Steiner on the left. We see Quina on the right. Dagger with the staff there. Dagger / Garnet with the staff there, and Zidane in the front. Is anyone else here? See Vivi or anything like that? No, it looks like it's just that group. But yeah. Sorry for the quality here, but this is what they had on Scryfall. So Edgar, King of Figaro. For 4 blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Artificer Noble, at rare. Edgar is a 4/5. And when Edgar enters, draw a card for each artifact you control. And then 2-headed coin. For the first time you flip 1 or more coins each turn. Those coins come up heads, and you win those flips. Standard perspective. The 6 mana, 6 drops, don't really see a ton of play in standard. 5 drops are kind of like the upper limit of what you normally see. Like technically you see things like Ugin see play, which is a 7 drop, but Ugin is so much more powerful than Edgar that it's hard to really compare them. But 6 drops you don't see a ton. of 6-drops. And if you do see a 6-drop, it really needs to be taking over the game, doing something to your opponent, drawing you a bunch, which this potentially could do. 6 mana for a 4/5. The stats aren't that great. It doesn't have any sort of evasion. It's not a flyer or anything like that. If you build around it, you could get a big boost of card draw, but I think that there's probably easier ways to get that card draw, especially in blue, that don't require as much work. To me, this is, and the second half of Edgar basically has no bearing in standard, so this is a commander card shoved into the standard set. I know there are some coin flip based commander decks out there. There's Mr. House, but this couldn't go into Mr. House. I know there's like a partner pair that's in Is It that this could fall into. But this is really, from a standard perspective, this isn't going to see play. As far as the reference, Edgar is, we talked about, this is the Machinist, or this is what was being used as a reference when Machinist was made for Final Fantasy XIV. He is King of Figaro, which is a nation in the middle of a desert with this big castle. He and another character named Sabin, who's referenced in the flavor text here, are I don't know if they're twin brothers or maybe it's just older and younger, are heirs to the throne of Figaro. When their father dies, there's a coin flip on who takes over and who takes over as king and who doesn't. Edgar wins the coin flip. Sabin leaves for exile, which I think is kind of what he wanted to do anyways. So not, they eventually become part of the party in the game. So there's not a ton of hard feelings here, but it is done with a coin flip. That's what we're getting there with the two-headed coin, and showing that almost certainly Edgar rigged the coin flip. I think because he knew that Sabin didn't want the responsibility of being king. So yeah, cool that we get an Edgar card. We got an Edgar card in the commander set. I wonder how many. We have Terra from FF6 in the main set. We've got Kefka in the main set. I wonder how many left we're going to really get. It's interesting that they pulled Edgar and not somebody like Locke or Celis for the main set. So I wonder if we're going to see Sabin in the main set. But yeah, interesting. Interesting. Next up, we have Ice Flan. For 4 blue, we have a creature elemental ooze at common. It is a 5/4 that has, when this creature enters, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls, put a stun counter on it, and it has island cycling for 2. Not really much constructed playability here. It's not the worst card in the world, but we just talked about Edgar. At least this immediately impacts the board, but Edgar draws you a bunch of cards. This is a 5/4 rather than a 4/5. Really, this is a card for limited. You put this into your deck mostly for the island cycling, and then every once in a while you're going to get to enough mana to play this and clear out a board stall. Pretty good to do something like that. taps the best thing that your opponent has, puts a stun counter on it. Gonna be pretty good in limited, I think, if the format is not so fast that getting up to 6 mana is unreasonable. As far as the reference here, it's just an enemy in Final Fantasy X. I don't think that there's any like notable ice flan that you fight in the game. I think it's just something that you see as you're going up Mount Gagazet. So yeah. Next up, we have a reprint. We've only seen a couple of reprints so far, though I imagine that they're not previewing a lot of reprints, and they're going to be saved for the end reveal when they spoil the entire set. But here is one, Syncopate. For X and a blue, we have an instant at common. Counter target spell unless its controller pays X. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. This is a card that has seen standard play in Pro Tour level decks in the past. We currently have a very similar card in Spectral Denial in standard right now. What Spectral Denial, the differences between Spectral Denial and Syncopate. Spectral Denial costs 1 generic less for each creature with power 4 or greater you control. So it's really, you can kind of use it as like a force spike. If you've got, you know, a big creature on the battlefield, you can put 0 into the X and technically get 1 into the X in order to get somebody for a little bit cheaper than something like Syncopate, where you have to put some amount of mana into the X to actually counter something. But that does not exile if you do counter the spell using that card, whereas this one does. For the most part, well, yeah, 99% of the scenarios, they're very, very similar cards. There are some, the exile can be decent if you're playing against some sort of reanimation strategy, or something that plays, you know, harmonized spells, things like that. You know, if your opponent casts a, if your opponent's trying to, you know, if they're trying to cast a Abhorrent Oculus, countering it with Syncopate means that they won't be able to helping hand it back later on in the game, as opposed to Spectral Denial, which they would be able to get back later. As far as whether this is going to like revolutionize blue decks, you know, you might see some copies in the sideboards of Azorius Control or what have you. It used to be a main deckable spell, but you really want to be like a hardcore control deck, and for the most part, even your Azorius control lists, like if we look at the Azorius control list that got second at the last weekend's regional championship, there weren't a ton of counter spells in that list. It was much more playing to the board, using removal, stuff like that, and had a few counter spells for the right moment rather than, you know, trying to play 12 different counter spells. If we get to the point where we're back to trying to play a bunch of different counter spells, then you could start seeing Syncopate sneak into main decks, but the meta would have to slow down, I think, a lot for Syncopate to see a ton of play. As far as reference, we've got Maester Seymour here, just being evil, and countering spells. I don't think this is anywhere specific. This is the quote is from one of the early fights that you have with Maester Seymour. I think when he's just kind of like testing you. I think the first time you see Ainama. That might be from where this quote is, though I don't know if that's exactly where this art is supposed to be depicting. So, talking about the crystals, here's our blue crystal, the water crystal. For 2 blue, we have a legendary artifact at rare. Blue spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill that many cards plus 4 instead. And then for 4 blue and tap the water crystal. Each opponent mills card. It's equal to the number of cards in your hand. So the middle one works for the tap ability. So every card in your hand, they're milling that number times 4. I guess no, that's wrong. It's not times. It's just 4 on. It's just plus 4, no matter what. Am I reading that correctly? So if you have some mill effect, if you're milling 1 at a time, then it's times 5. But if you're milling a bunch at once, then it's just plus 4. That's a lot worse than what I thought it was when I initially read this when it got first spoiled. Mill in standard, so mill is winning via mill is a viable strategy in standard. Mill specific decks don't see a ton of play. You can win via mill because if you're a control deck, you can play, if you're like, you can play Jace the Perfected Mind, who can mill for 15 cards at a time very easily in a game that you've sort of wrestled control over. You can use Jace as your finisher to finish the game off by milling your opponent out. But strategies specifically built around using mill, like turbo milling or something like that, not really seeing a ton of play. I think there was one. Well, no, that was just a content creator video. I was thinking that there might have been something in an RC, but I think it was just a content creator video. There is the Simic Siege from Tarkir that does a decent amount of milling whenever you cast instants and sorceries. This basically doubles the amount of mill, since it's going to be plus 4 because it mills for 4 at a time. There are a number of other just sort of side mill cards. There's a card in Aether Drift that once you reach max speed, whenever you draw a card, your opponent mills 2. But I think most of the time that's too slow, and for a lot of decks in standard, more than you would think, as like dedicated graveyard decks, there are a number of decks that enjoy the fact that they would be getting milled. Your Azorius Omniscience decks, they want to get that Omniscience into the graveyard, so you're kind of helping them along the way if you're milling them. Jeskai Oculus decks, They want to get those Oculuses, those abhorrent Oculuses into the graveyard, or they just want to get fodder into the graveyard if they happen to have the Oculus in hand. There's Rakdos Reanimator strategies that want to get those creatures into the graveyard to reanimate. Even something like anything that's playing Storm Chaser's talent. So your Pixie decks, your Esper Pixie decks, your Is It Prowess decks, they don't mind being milled. It's not part of their main strategy, but if you mill over, they will at some point be able to pull an instant or sorcery out of their graveyard using level 2 of Storm Chaser's talent. So I think that, combined with there not being a ton of really good mill cards in Standard outside of Jace or Jace strategies. I spoke about Jace. There was one Worlds. There was a Dimir Demons deck that sort of had a combo finish that it could do, where you played a card called Doomsday Excruciator that exiled everything but the last 6 cards of your library, and what they tried to do was play that and then play a Jace to finish off the rest of the library. That's technically a mill deck. It has a mill kill condition, but you don't need any help from something like the Water Crystal to win that way. I think for the most part, again, this is mostly just like a fun commander card. The 1 cost reduction for blue spells for Standard, you're still playing a 4 mana card that doesn't really impact the board the turn that you play it. I guess I missed River Churn Monument from Aether Drift as well, as something that sees a decent amount of play. If this was ×4 instead of +4, I think that card would be very good. But you're still playing a 4 mana card that doesn't really impact the board. To speed up your mill, and I worry that you're going to play that and then you're just going to die the turn after you play this. So don't really see it in the Standard. Obviously, the folks that love mill see this card and probably going to put it into their commander decks, but that's where you're going to see it. Next up, we have Gaius Van Baelsar. For 2 black, we get a legendary creature, Human Soldier, at uncommon. Gaius is a 3/2 that has, when Gaius enters, choose 1. Each player sacrifices a creature token of their choice. Each player sacrifices a non-token creature of their choice, or each player sacrifices an enchantment of their choice. Not the worst card in the world. It kind of reminds me of Rankle from well, it really reminds you of Fleshbag Marauder or any version of that kind of effect, where you can, play this, sacrifice Gaius to itself, and then they have to sacrifice something on their end. Fun little flavor thing for sacrifices and enchantment. The Garlane Empire, which Gaius is one of their generals, has a very anti-primal stance, so sacrificing an enchantment makes sense because, hey, I get to kill a summon. Fun thing with Gaius, this might be a good sideboard card for black decks for the mirror, because right now black decks, if they want to kill an opponent's Unholy Annex, they have to either play I think it's called Withering Torment. It's the 2 and a black, destroy target creature enchantment, you lose 2 life, or Feed the Swarm, destroy target creature enchantment, you lose life equal to the mana value of the thing that you're destroying. Gaius, you don't have to pay any amount of life to do that. You can, and you know, if your opponent doesn't have an active Unholy Annex, then you can just use Gaius as removal for the Shieldred or for their Archfiend of the Dross. So I think Gaius can see sideboard play in mono black demons to primarily to answer an opponent's Unholy Annex. Main deckable, probably not. 4 mana for a Giga Fleshbag Marauder. A little too much, but that specific scenario I think is interesting. Flavor wise, we already talked about a little bit. Gaius is sort of the main, well, the front for the main antagonist, but main-ish antagonist of the first of A Realm Reborn. Very prominent figure. Not going to spoil what else happens with Gaius as the game goes on, because we see him here. He's dressed up like, I haven't played a ton of 12, but I know that a lot of the designs for the generals of the Garlean Empire are based off of the designs for some of the villains in FF12. So if you played FF12 but haven't played FF14, maybe that's what you see when you see Gaius. Hard to see, but he's got a gunblade here, because gunblades are the big thing in the Garlean Empire. This very much feels like the end of A Realm Reborn main content, or the scene that we're seeing Gaius in here. Won't speak too much more about what that means. But yeah, I think it's a playable sideboard card for mono black demons specifically. You do have to be very careful when you play Gaius, because it is each player sacrifices an enchantment. So if you also have the Unholy Annex, you're going to lose yours. But is something that you can bring in out of the sideboard. Speaking of the Phantom Train, I forgot that we hadn't talked about this one yet, but I do have a list of cards that I talked about and haven't talked about yet. But this was spoiled pretty soon after my previous stream. So Phantom Train is for a 3 and a black for an artifact vehicle at uncommon. It is a 4/4 with trample. It doesn't have a crew cost, but it has sacrifice another artifact or creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this vehicle. It becomes a spirit artifact creature until end of turn. In addition to its other types until end of turn. So that's how you basically turn it into something that can attack. 4 mana for a 4/4 trample that can't attack unless you have sacrifice fodder. Almost certainly a limited card. The fun thing about, or you can argue that, hey, this is a repeatable sack outlet. So if you're in some sort of aristocrat strategy, then having a Phantom Train out there can help you with that, because you want to be sacrificing stuff, and for a very long time you haven't had repeatable sack outlets in standard. We do have one that's better than this in Bartolome. It's at 2 mana. Sure, it's a creature, instead of a artifact. Technically, this would turn into a creature as soon as you start sacrificing stuff. But if you're really like trying to dodge removal, you can, you know, sacrifice a bunch of stuff and put all of the +1/+1 counter trigger, you know, the triggers that make this turn into a creature on the stack. If you're worried that your opponent's going to try to remove your Phantom Train before you can start getting your other sacks in. But even then, you don't have to do it like that. You can just make it become a creature, and then as soon as your opponent tries to remove it, sacrifice everything else to get all those triggers. I think because Bartolome is in standard and isn't rotating until quite a while from now, probably not going to see Phantom Train in standard. I don't think that there's really a ton of artifact sacrifice synergies in standard. I think this is mostly here as a decent threat in some sort of sacrifice deck in limited, and possibly something that you could play in Commander, though 4 mana for a repeatable sack out in Commander, you're gonna have a lot cheaper stuff to be able to sacrifice things in Commander. Next up, we have Poison the Waters. Reference. This is the Phantom Train in Final Fantasy VI. There is a woods in FF6 near-ish to Doma Castle that when people die, their spirits get on the Phantom Train and it whisks them to the afterlife. Your party, or this particular party of Sabin, Cayenne, and Shadow, which you see running away from the train at the front, stumble upon the Phantom Train. There's a heart-wrenching moment where Cayenne sees his recently, and this isn't spoiling a ton because it's pretty early in the game, sees his recently deceased family on the train. Y'all end up boarding the train. So you're like, are we actually dead? Got something going on there, and you eventually have to fight the train, which is, I believe we'll see another card which references fighting the train later on. Now back to Poison the Waters. For 1 and a black, we have a sorcery at uncommon. Choose 1. All creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. And then, or target player reveals their hand. You choose an artifact or creature card from it. That player discards that card. So we do have in standard mono black discard decks, and we do have 2 mana discard effects seeing play, either in the form of Deep Cavern Bat or Cruel Claw's Heist. I think both Deep Cavern Bat and Cruel Claw's Heist are better than this. Your Deep Cavern Bat can get any non-land. Cruel Claw's Heist can get any non-land. Cruel Claw's Heist is double black, so you have to be pretty committed to being a black deck to be able to cast Cruel Claw's Heist. Other thing that's good for Cruel Claw's Heist is it exiles. So if you are going against an Omniscience deck, though this wouldn't hit Omniscience, but something, you know, going against an Oculus deck, right? You can snipe their Abhorrent Oculus, and they won't be able to reanimate it, right? There's also intimidation tactics, which is the same text as the second half of this effect, but at 1 mana and cycles for 3. So you can argue that also has sort of like 2 effects: either cycle this to turn into something else, or get rid of a creature or artifact from your opponent's hand. I believe that one exiles as well, but I'm not 100%. The all creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. You know, it's going to be good at clearing up tokens, so you might think that, hey, this is good against prowess. The problem is the token that currently has Quarry Steelcutter attached to it is a base 2/2. It's the 1/1 monk with prowess, and then it itself gets +1/+1. So this isn't going to kill the one attached to Quarry Steelcutter, or that Quarry Steelcutter is attached to. It also doesn't kill Monastery Swiftspear, so because that's a 1/2. So it could clean up you know, if your opponent was able to make a bunch of tokens, it could clean up those. But if those tokens over the course of those previous turns got monstrous raged, then they'll be 2/2s as well at their base level, because they're getting +1/+1 from the monstrous roll. This isn't like a good answer to is it prowess. You're leaving them behind with plenty of things to kill you. So I don't really think this sees play in standard. Even with the flexibility, even with the sometimes I'm going to get, you know, an otter token from Stormchaser's Talent. Sometimes I'm going to get my opponent's turn 1 Heartfire hero. But if they play a turn 1 Monastery Swiftspear, or if they play turn 1 Hired Claw, or if it's not turn 2 and those have a +1/+1 counter on them, you're just going to be sitting there with this card in your hand like, okay, I'm going to hope that I'm going to hit their 3-drop and then see that they've got a Monstrous Rage in hand and cry. So yeah, I don't think this sees any standard play. Discard effects in limited, I don't really know if they see a ton of play. And a -1/-1 sweeper, I don't really know if that sees a ton of play. We'll have to see if there's some sort of token deck that maybe this gets some value against in limited. This might just be, you know, a card to test your draft ability on whether you think that this is good enough or not. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's good enough. As far as referencing, this is Kefka poisoning the water supply of Doma, which leads to the death of Kyan and Kyan's wife and son. Again, very early on in that game, so not spoiling too much there. And one of the big, like, hey, this guy's an actual maniac points to give some insight into Kefka's character. And I think the art's great. Love the art. And we get some Kefka laughs in the flavor text. Next up, we have Reno and Rude. For 1 in the black, we have a legendary creature, Human Assassin, at uncommon. Reno and Rude are a 2/1, and they have Menace, and whenever Reno and Rude deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library. You may sacrifice another creature or artifact. If you do, you may pay play the exiled card this turn, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. As far as standard 2-drops in black, there aren't a ton of, just specifically in black, there aren't a ton that see a ton of play. You mostly see in sort of your black based decks, you mostly see, let me double check. Yeah, we do have this looping. Okay, I was checking the music. You mostly see people playing the bat, and then a host of 2 mana removal. So, you know, there is a slot for 2-drops. I don't think Reno and Root make it. I think if you're really looking for another 2-drop, you've got, you know, your Dark Confidant and Friends and various Dark Confidant lookalikes, Caustic Broncos, stuff like that. And if you're in any other color than just mono black, then you have a lot better to choose from. You've got, if you're in Golgari, you've got Mosswood Dread Knight. If you're in Orzhov, you've got like Essence Channeler or Amalia or Bartolome or hell, even Ajani's Pridemate. You've got the 2-mana bat that whenever you gain life, your opponent loses life, loses 1 life. You know, you've got a lot of different options. Well, I guess that's also in black, so you know that's something that you could play if you're in some sort of life gain strategy. When I was looking at this before we did this stream, when I saw this previewed a couple days ago, I was thinking about, you know, how playable is this in that 2-drop slot, and I was thinking when I was looking at it before, hey, if this allowed you to cash in Reno and Rude itself or themselves, maybe that's playable. You still you sort of turn Reno and Rude into a card draw if you see that your opponent, whatever you ripped from your opponent's library, is very, very good. But this has to sacrifice another creature or artifact, so you have to have some sort of fodder to be able to sacrifice. But I think even then, there's probably just better 2-drops. If you're looking for any sort of card draw, you can just play Dark Confidant, which is coming in this exact set, alongside Reno and Rude. I think this is mostly here for limited. If you want some sort of sacrifice synergy, and some sort of sideways card draw in limited, then you've got Reno and Rude, but not there in standard. As far as reference, this is a pair of the Turks from Final Fantasy VII. The Turks are sort of a mercenary assassin organization under Shinra that sort of do the dirty work of Shinra, the clandestine dirty work of Shinra. This kind of looks like them sabotaging the plate, sabotaging the controls or the supports for the plate that falls on Sector 7 to try and squash out Avalanche after they've been blowing up Mako reactors all over Midgar. Yeah, that's almost certainly what this is depicting here. So yeah. We briefly mentioned Inama before. Here is Summon Inama for 4 black. We have a enchantment creature, Sagahora, at uncommon. It is a 4/4 with menace, so always nice to see. We are getting a fairly large amount of summons at uncommon, so they are going to be something that you're going to see in draft fairly regularly. And so Inema has 4 chapters. The first 3 chapters are all the same. It's Pain. You draw a card and lose a life for each of the first three chapters, and then Oblivion on the overdrive, the final chapter, however you want to think about it. Each opponent sacrifices a creature of their choice and loses 3 life. Pretty good limited card if the game is able to go long and get a lot of card draw back at a point in the game where you're probably whittled down to playing off the top of your deck. This has 4 chapters, so you do get at least 2 attacks in with Inema, and if it's able to get to Oblivion, it goes out with hitting them for 3 and making them sacrifice something. At that point in the game, they'll probably have, some cheap creature that they've been holding on to for a while to sacrifice, but still it hits them for another 3. I think a pretty good limited card. Not really standard playable, too expensive, not doing a ton. The draw 3, you sort of get 3 shots at Phyrexian Arena 3 shots at Phyrexian Arena for the first 3, but you got to play 6 for that. Phyrexian Arena is literally in standard right now and doesn't see a ton of play, mostly because Unholy Annex is also in standard and gets the spotlight over it. So yeah, not really a constructed playable card, but a fun card for limited. I think a pretty good one for limited if the format is slow enough to support it. And glad we saw an Inema card. I was really worried that there was only going to be the Through the Ages. I forget what Inema was a reprint of in Through the Ages, but glad we got an Inema, because we also didn't see it in the FF10 Commander Precon. So glad we got an Inema in the set, in one of the sets. As far as the reference here, this is the summon that Maester Seymour uses. I don't believe that you can ever get it in FF10. Yeah, I don't think so. And then this is also a boss in FF14. I won't go into where it is because it's fairly spoilery. Next up, we have Coral Sword. For a single red, we have an artifact equipment at uncommon. It has flash, so flash is I can play this at instant speed. When this equipment enters, attach it to target creature you control. That creature gains first strike until end of turn. Equipped creature gets +1/+0, and it has an equip cost of 1. So this is kind of like, so if you just think about it as just a straight up combat trick, I think there's a card called Sure Strike, which is instant speed, target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. I don't even know if that's in standard. I know that that Sparky, the bot in MTGA, has a copy of it in their red deck, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's in standard. That card is not that playable. This one, there is a card called Mirren Blade Splitter or Bane Splitter, Mirren something Splitter, that is for a single red, flash attached to a target creature. Doesn't give first strike, but it does give +2/+0. But I think it has an equip cost of 3. That card sees some play in mice decks, not a ton of mice decks, but some play in some mice decks. You mostly see it in like best of one Rakdos Fling decks because it gives this, you know, permanent-ish boost to power, and it's a decent boost to power for 1 mana. Triggers Valiant for your Heartfire hero, and you're gonna try and fling this thing, and so that power is good there. Specifically for Rakdos Fling, I don't think that this replaces Mirren Bane Splitter or Blade Splitter in those decks prior to rotation, because they're really looking for that power increase, not necessarily the first strike. They don't really mind if their creature dies because most of their creatures have a death effect that hits their opponent for the power of the creature. So giving first strike might be a downside in that deck. I could see Coral Sword in a mice deck, something that's a little more into the mice theme, with a bunch of things that have Valiant, not just Heartfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger, but you maybe those two are just enough. Mostly for the fact that it only has an equip cost of 1. So you see in mono red, the mono red decks that people, where they tried to put Quarry Steelcutter in just like the mono red deck, you would see sometimes people who would just re-equip Quarry Steelcutter to like a mouse, like a Heartfire hero or an Emberheart Challenger, just to get that Valiant trigger. And Quarry Steelcutter equips for 2. This only equips for 1. So if you play this early as just a combat trick to keep your Heartfire hero alive through there, and then as you run out of things to do, you know, you have an Emberheart Challenger on the battlefield and you're in top deck mode. If you got a Coral Sword on the battlefield, you can just re-equip that Coral Sword to the Emberheart Challenger to get those Valiant triggers to try and find, you know, your next pump spell or another creature or something along those lines, right? Or you just re-equip it to your Heartfire hero so that it gets big enough that your opponent can't really kill it anymore. They have to just try and chump it for a while. I think while Monstrous Rage is still legal, probably not going to see play, but I can see a world where Monstrous Rage gets banned and you bring in some number of Coral Swords into just the, you know, the really good mono red deck. Or if you want to play Boros Mice with Mabel and other Valiant creatures that outside of just those two, Coral Sword can be decent there. Also notably is an artifact for 1 mana, is a game object for things like Regal Bunnycorn. So even though the effect is pretty weak, we talked about just sort of the one-time effect of Sure Strike not really being standard playable. There are more things going on with this card than just thinking about the one-time use that you have with it when you flash it in. So don't forget about this card when you're making some sort of aggro deck. Give me a second to grab some water real quick. I guess it's not water, it's some soda, but 1 second. Alrighty, so this is the third of the 4 crystals that we've seen that were spoiled today. So the fire crystal for 2 red, we get a legendary artifact at rare. Red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Creatures you control have haste, and then for 4 red, tap, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. I think of the crystals that we've seen, this is probably the best one. Is it standard playable? So this Fires of Yavimaya style effect, creatures you control have haste, or Bedlam, or there's a bunch of different old Magic cards that have that creatures you control have haste. That has been a playable effect in Pro Tour winning decks for the life of Magic. The Fires of Yavimaya was a big deck for a while, way back in the day when Fires of Yavimaya was printed. There is currently in Standard one of the sieges from Tarkir Dragonstorm that has a Fires of Yavimaya effect for 1 mana cheaper, but it is Gruul. And it also gives trample. So if you're wanting that Fires of Yavimaya effect, you're probably gonna want that version, unless you think that you also want the other parts of the fire crystal here. Reducing the cost of your red spells by 1. It's fine if you're able to do sort of a big red deck in Standard, then this making everything that you play as you go bigger and bigger cheaper, and this sort of one-shot, or not, it's not one-shot, but fairly expensive Kiki-Jiki, create a copy of a target creature you control. That can be very powerful if you have ETB effects that you want to re-trigger, if you have sacrifice effects that you want to re-trigger, or if you just want to... Oh, I was going to say, this doesn't give haste, but the fire crystal gives haste, so it doesn't have to give haste twice. So that can be a powerful effect, though at 6 mana it's pretty expensive to do so. But having it be repeatable is also a different story. So I think this is the most standard playable of what we've seen so far of this crystal cycle. But I think even then, it's still 4 mana, not really impacting the board. The hope is that every creature that you have subsequently is just going to smack in. But you also have Enduring Ferocity, the red enduring creature that kind of does the same thing of giving all your things haste. And that's a 4 mana card, and that's a creature in and of itself. So you're really going to need to, if you're going to play this in Standard, you're really going to want to take advantage of that. Red spells cost 1 less to cast. And big red hasn't really been hugely viable in Standard. I think from a commander perspective, playable until end of time. Mono red Fires of Yavimaya effects, I think you mostly only have Bedlam I'm sure there are more, but decks that want this effect probably can't have enough of it, and then having all the extra cherry on top of creatures you control have haste. Great for the decks that want them. As far as what this is depicting, again, I don't have a ton of FF3 experience, so can't really tell you much on here. We got a comment in chat. Hey, Sin. So Sin is somebody who had followed me when I was mostly doing the Prog Reborn stuff. Thanks for stopping on by. Don't know if you've got any Magic the Gathering experience or not. If you do, then happy to have you around. If you don't, then happy to have you around regardless. Next up, haste magic. For 1 in a red, we have an instant at common. Target creature gets +3/+1 and gains haste until end of turn. Exile the top card of your library. You may play it until your next instep. There's a card in standard right now called Blazing Crescendo, which does everything that this card does, except it doesn't also give haste. So this is just a strict upgrade to Blazing Crescendo. That card sees some play in red decks. I think mostly in the fling decks, because it gives you that +3 power. And really, if you want to have some card draw-ish in those decks, which are really just trying to vomit their hand out as fast as possible. And this is also nice in those particular decks because it's giving haste. So if you go if you have 3 mana, you go Heartfire Hero, haste magic, you immediately smack in for 4. I guess it'd be for 5 because it'd have the Valiant trigger. So borderline standard playable. I don't think you're gonna see a ton of competitive play, because 2 mana for this effect is a little expensive, but you'll see it on ladder in Magic Gathering Arena when I say that. I think probably pretty good in I think pretty good-ish in limited. For the same reason, you get to play a 2-drop and immediately have it smack in if you're trying to be aggressive in limited, while also getting some card draw off of there. Outside of that, in Commander, I think the only real place for this is in either like Feather or Zada, things that care about you casting these combat tricks. And like something like Zada, very good because it's going to give all your creatures, all your other tokens and what have you, haste, so you get in your big Zada swing to try and kill the board in 1 turn. Outside of that deck in Commander, you don't see a lot of commanders playing combat tricks. As far as what this is representing, it's you casting haste on Cloud. I think this is kind of the effect that you get in Rebirth, though I honestly didn't really look that hard whenever I cast haste on my party members. Nibelheim Aflame for 2 red. We get a sorcery at Mythic. It is choose target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. If the spell was cast from a graveyard, discard your hand and draw 4 cards, and it has a flashback cost of 5 red. So we've seen similar versions of this card. There is a version of this card in Standard right now called Waltz of Rage that really doesn't see play at all. The main reason is, well, there's a bunch of different reasons, right? If you're trying to play a board wipe, you're probably not also playing to the board yourself. And the big problem here is if your opponent responds to Nibelheim of Flame while it's on the stack, you had to target the creature that is going to deal its damage to everything else so they can remove it, at which point you paid 4 mana for nothing. So not really Standard playable. There are, in the flashback cost, sure, you have this flashback cost, but importantly to know, if you do this flashback cost, again, you have to have something in, even if you're doing the flashback in, or casting this from a graveyard. So again, we talked about with from father to son, if you have some other way to cast it from your graveyard outside of doing it for flashback, sure, but mostly casting it via flashback. Because this targets, one, you have to have a creature that you control on the battlefield, and if they kill the creature that you're targeting in response, that fizzles the spell, that counters the spell. So you still, if they are able to respond to your flashback version of this, which they'll be much more likely to be able to respond to because they're going to see it in your graveyard, they kill the creature that you're trying to Nibelheim of Flame while this is on the stack, you wouldn't be able to discard your hand and draw 4 cards because the spell is completely countered, because that's the only target of the spell. So I think it's pretty unplayable in Standard. There are similar effects to this in Commander. There's a card called Chandra's Ignition. Importantly, with Chandra's Ignition, that also hit each opponent. And usually when people play Chandra's Ignition, they're trying to, like, it as a board wipe is, you know, just a side benefit. They're trying to do some big effect to get this big creature and hopefully try and end the game by dealing a ton of damage to every opponent. This does not hurt your opponents. So this is a pretty big miss in my opinion, especially for such an iconic scene that we're seeing depicted here. For flavor wise, this is Sephiroth walking through the flames after he burnt down Cloud's hometown of Nibelheim, after learning about his, you know, dark origin or what have you. So as far as a card goes, you're gonna have to navigate to a situation where this is good, and I think there are better effects on there. Should note, but before I completely poo-poo this, right? This is the creature dealing damage to stuff. So if you have Prosper, a creature with Death Touch, that creature is the one dealing damage to it. So even if it's only dealing 1 damage to everything, because it has Death Touch, it's going to kill everything. If you have a creature with lifelink, just like with Chandra's Ignition, you'd be able to gain a bunch of life from that effect. So it has a place, but not really standard playable. Next up, we have Queen Braun. I've never actually heard her name spoken, so I think that's what we're going with. But she is a 2 and a red, legendary creature, human noble at uncommon. She is a 2/1 with prowess. This is the first instance of prowess in this review here. So whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And then whenever Queen Braun attacks, create a 0/1 black wizard creature token with whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this token deals 1 damage to each opponent. 3 mana for 2/1 is pretty rough. In previous streams, we've looked at other cards and bemoaned the fact that this dies to basically every one of the... Well, I shouldn't even say basically. It dies to every one of the most commonly played removal spells in the format. Burst Lightnings, Shocks, Torch the Towers, Cut Downs, and then, Nowhere to Runs, and then obviously all the Go for the Throats and Anoint with Afflictions, stuff like that. Well, Anoint with Affliction doesn't kill everything, but this is a 3-power creature, so it dies to Anoint with Affliction as well. Or a 3 mana value creature, so it dies to Anoint with Affliction as well. So I think if we just stop there, this is not really standard playable. You could argue that this can go in... there's Kuja, the 4 mana 4/4 that cares about the number of wizards that you have, and so this fits into like an FF9 themed deck where you're making these black mage wizards, and this is a way to sort of accelerate to getting to 4 wizards. You Queen Braun, if you have Queen Braun on the battlefield, you have you play Queen Braun on turn 3, you play Kuja on turn 4. Kuja himself is a wizard. Queen Braun attacks, creates a wizard on attack. Kuja on instep creates a wizard. You just need to find 1 more wizard somewhere to get Kuja to flip. So there's some possibility if that deck goes anywhere, though in my mind, a deck that wants to play Kuja isn't trying to like turbo play Kuja or flip Kuja. It's just playing Kuja for value. So I think Queen Braun doesn't quite make it. It says Prowess. There's a deck called Is It Prowess that's terrorizing standard right now. Queen Braun's not going to be in that deck. Limited, probably fine. In some sort of aggressive deck, if you're able to get those wizard tokens out and able to play that sort of prowessy game, that can end the game really quickly. So this is probably a decent card for an aggressive strategy, but it is a 3 mana 2/1, so might be tough getting in there to get that so that you get that so that you start generating those wizards that can start killing your opponent very quickly. But you play Queen Braun, turn 3, attack, represent a combat trick. It's possible that she's there for limited, but not quite there for standard. As far as who this is This is the quote-unquote mother of Princess Garnet, the main antagonist force of the first third or half of Final Fantasy IX. And yeah, not much else to say. Except I was wondering before where the rest of the side quests are. We have at least one other one that was previewed a couple days ago. Side quest Play Blitzball. For Tuna Red, we have an enchantment at Uncommon. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And then at the end of combat on your turn, if a player was dealt 6 or more combat damage this turn, transform this enchantment and then attach it to a creature you control. So, question from the chat. I still have Prog Reborn auto-posted. No, I don't actually have that auto-posted in the Discord. I make those posts myself. I have been posting it into there, however. But it's not auto-posted. I have been making those posts in the Discord. Anyways, back to the card. Oh, you're talking about the stream element stuff. Yeah. You are correct on there. I haven't turned any of that stuff off. So as far as the card goes, I know there's a backside, but let's whenever we've been reviewing these cards that can flip, I want to look at the front side before we see if it's worth it to even play it based off of the front side, or if you're really hoping to get to the backside and then evaluate whether the backside is enough to overcome the front side of it. So, beginning of combat on your turn, target creature gets plus for 3 mana. You get this repeatable, combat trick. It's not really a trick because they're going to see it coming, but repeatable buff to your creatures. In standard, for a while, the Gruul versions of mice were the preferred way to play your mice deck, because you had a card called Innkeeper's Talent, which was just a repeatable way to put a +1/+1 counter on your creatures. It had other benefits of you upgrade it and it would give ward, so they're a little more resilient to removal, etc. That was only 2 mana to get started, and it gave a permanent buff as opposed to just a +2/+0. Buffing the toughness from the +1/+1 counter is also really nice, so you're not just swinging in and it trading. It's more likely to survive the encounter with your opponent's creatures. But if you want to be mono red and you want to have a repeatable way to trigger Valiant, to trigger things that care about being targeted, this is an option for you. As far as reaching, and this does gain in effect the turn that you play it, if you play it on your first main phase. In those sort of mono red decks, your 3-drops are pretty packed right now. You're playing 4 of Screaming Nemesis. You're playing 4 of Tursa Light Shatter. Are you really playing a card that's not a creature in those decks? Probably not, but maybe if you're in some sort of mice deck, some sort of like Boros mice deck that really cares a lot more about wanting to trigger Valiant, then maybe this is an option. As far as being able to flip it, if a player was dealt 6 or more combat damage, it has to specifically be combat damage, but most red decks right now are getting its damage done via combat. So I don't think this is that hard to do in a red deck, so you're probably going to be able to transform this in any deck that you play this in. Monstrous Rage gives you that trample, so you're going to be able to get over. You play this in Mice. Manifold Mouse giving your Heartfire hero double strike. You're definitely going to be able to get that 6 or more combat damage this turn. So what does it transform into? It's a decent card on the front half, but you're really gonna. It's not overcoming. You're not gonna play this instead of some of your 3 drops. So we do need to see how good the other side's gonna be on here. So what it turns into is World Champion Celestial Weapon, which I believe is the ultimate weapon, epic weapon, best weapon that you can get for Waka, though I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while. So it's a legendary artifact equipment, which is interesting because the front half of side quest is not legendary. And you don't have the option to not transform this. So if you're playing multiple copies of side quest Blitzball, I mean, if you're in standard, if you've got a few turns where you're dealing 6 or more combat damage to your opponent, they're probably dead. But that is something to note. You can't not flip this, and the back half is legendary. So let's keep reading. Double Overdrive. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 and has double strike, and it has an equip cost of 3. So on the flip, it's going to automatically equip to something, so you don't have to play other equip costs, and giving something double strike and +2/+0 is very, very powerful. So this is a really good equipment. It's not tutorable by Cloud because it's not an equipment on its front side, which is unfortunate. I could see this seeing play, but I think you're mostly doing it because you want to be different. I don't think that this is better than, just playing straight up mono red, just playing Screaming Nemesis and Tursa, or things like that. So it's a powerful equipment, a very powerful equipment, but you got to jump through some hoops. You're not going to get the double strike until after you've already been through one combat phase. So your opponent's going to know, hey, this creature that this thing got attached to is coming. They'll have a chance to respond to it. And the equip cost of 3, it's not horrible. It's not like those equip cost 4 that we saw with the Machinist Arsenal. But I think you're mostly just trying to be special playing this, as opposed to just playing a much more lean, much more straightforward mono red deck. Commander wise, I don't really know. I don't play a ton of aggressive strategies in Commander. You're very likely going to be able to flip it in Commander. Somebody's going to be open if you're being aggressive. Is that good enough? Giving something double strike, you can give your commander double strike. That's pretty scary. I could see it seeing Commander play. Next up, we alluded to this card when we were looking at the Phantom Train, but we have Suplex. For 1 and a red, we have a sorcery at common as choose one. Either Suplex deals 3 damage to target creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead, or exile target artifact. So in current standard, we have a Braid, which is basically just this card, except a couple of key key differences. So Abrade is for 1 on a red, instant, choose 1, deal 3 damage to target creature in sentence, or destroy target artifact. So you're between Abrade and Suplex, you're trading instant speed for exile, essentially, across both of these. And there are pluses and minuses to each side. For Abrade, instant speed, great being able to hold up on your opponent who is trying to play a monstrous rage, trying to go in on a slick shot show off in, like, is it prowess or what have you. You know, you're able to respond to that and sort of blow them out with a 2-for-1. And then the destroy versus exile and artifact, for the most part in standard, that's the same. I can't really think of artifacts that you're really trying to exile, that you really need to exile. There are artifacts that you want to get rid of, but it being an exile effect is, you know, a benefit of being exile versus being instant speed is what I'm trying to get at here. The big thing here is, can I kill my opponent's Corey Steelcutter? And both Suplex and Abrade do that. So the real question is this being 3 mana exile a creature that happened to die to this, the 3 damage, is that good enough? And there are some really good things that creatures that you do want to exile. One, Heartfire Hero, exiling it. Both Heartfire Hero and Cacophony Scamp have those die triggers that deal its power to an opponent. Anything with a die trigger, exiling it instead is significantly better to do. You technically can do that already with Torch the Tower, which is why Torch the Tower sees a lot of play in standard. But this gets up to 3 mana without having to jump through hoops like you do with Torch the Tower. The really big thing for this card compared to Torch the Tower is this would get rid of Unstoppable Slasher, which is 2 and a black for a creature. I don't remember the exact type, but it has, when this deals damage, opponent loses half their life rounded up, and when this dies, return to the battlefield tapped under your control with 2 stun counters on it. And so this permanently gets rid of an Unstoppable Slasher. An Unstoppable Slasher sees some play. It sees a lot more play on, like, the Magic the Gathering Arena ladder than it sees competitive play, but it does see some competitive play. And being able to get rid of an Unstoppable Slasher with Suplex versus Abrade is a pretty big benefit. So it's really going to be a metagame call on whether you're going to play Abrade or whether you're going to play Suplex. It's definitely a playable card in Standard. I think it's mostly going to be, is Unstoppable Slasher something that I have to worry about, or is Heartfire Hero something that I really have to worry about? In those two scenarios, Suplex is better. But if you're just wanting a card in your sideboard to deal with a Corey Steelcutter and just having sort of incidental removal on top of it is just nice on the turns that your opponent hasn't found a Quarry Steel Cutter but did find a Drake Hatcher or a Slickshot Show Off or whatever have you. Then you're probably just going to want to play a Braid instead. So it's really a metagame call on how playable this is. Limited, pretty premium removal. Commander, not really going to see a ton of play. I don't think a Braid sees a ton of play. Reference, this is Sabin fighting the the Phantom Train. This is reference to probably one of the original memes on the internet of in FF6. Sabin's special ability is called Blitz, and what you do is when you hit Blitz, you then input a command, kind of like a fighting game command, to like do like an aura beam, which is basically a fireball, or pummel your opponent, etc., etc. One of the options is suplex. I think it's like up, down, X, Y. And when you suplex something, an enemy in FF6, Sabin sort of grabs the enemy, jumps into the air, and then comes back down onto the ground with the enemy flipped over, and then deals a bunch of damage. And this is, FF6 is a Super Nintendo game, so this is all sprites, so it's pretty silly looking. He sort of jumps at the thing, both the sprites just sort of like fly off the top of the screen, and then they both come down, but the other sprite is just like literally flipped on its vertical axis, or I guess flipped on its horizontal axis, and hits the ground. And the meme is you use suplex on the Phantom Train, which in the fight you're like kind of like running away from the Phantom Train as it's on the track, and then you use suplex and you lift the train up and slam it onto the ground. And that's a meme that's been around for probably since the dawn of the internet. I shouldn't really say that because the internet's been around for longer than FF6 was around, but wide acceptance of the internet. And it's funny, it's fun that they reference suplex, and they're specifically referencing the fact that Sabin is suplexing the Phantom Train. Next up, we have the most egregious power creep that Wizards of the Coast has done. We have Balam T-Rexar. For 4 green, we have a creature dinosaur at common. It is a 6/6 with trample that has, when this creature enters, you gain 3 life, and forced cycling for 2. So we've seen a bunch of different forced cycling cards. I think this is going to be our green one. Pretty playable in limited. The power creep is this is a strict upgrade to Colossal Dreadmaw, which is a pretty big meme in the Magic community as the most powerful creature in the game. Not really constructed playable. Not even like some sort of like dinosaur deck. I don't really think that you'd play this, but perfectly fine and limited. Cycle this early to make sure that you hit your land drops. Things like Honey Mammoth and stuff have been pretty good in limited, as long as the format's reasonably slow. This gains you 1 less life than Honey Mammoth would, but still 3 life. You get a 6/6. It has trample, so it's probably going to be able to get through your opponent's board. Perfectly fine limited card as long as the format's slow enough. Reference, I didn't play FF8. I haven't even really watched people speedrun FF8, so Other than I recognize the name Balam, like Balam Gardens or something like that. And it's Squall and Quistis in the foreground here. Other than that, I don't really know a ton of what's going on here. So, next up, we have Blitzball Shot. For 1 on the green, we have an instant at common. Target creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn. Not much to say here. You know, a giant growth for 1 extra that gives trample. This type of effect is printed in basically every set. Pretty good-ish combat trick. Instant speed, gives trample, you know. Not much to say here. As far as the reference, I think it's just sort of a blitzball match, which is sort of kind of like a water polo, but all underwater, in these like big spheres of water. I think this, based off of the quote here, there's a point pretty early on in the game where Waka's blitzball team sort of makes it to the finals of the big tournament that they usually fail out of really early. I think they've lost like every game. And there's the line. Everybody seems to be calling for Waka, folks, or whatever going on over the PA, because I think that there's a point where you either like you know, you're winning or you're losing, and they're gonna say this, hey, you know, get Waka. I think he's hanging out in the locker room for some reason. I don't remember the exact reason, but people trying to urge him out onto the into the blitzball stadium to play. The final crystal that was revealed today. We saw the black one way earlier. This is the final one that was revealed today. Of the 4 that were revealed today. The Earth Crystal for 2 green. We get a legendary artifact at rare. Green spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters be put onto a creature you control, twice that many +1/+1 counters are put onto that creature instead. And then for, again, 4 and its color, 4 green, and tap, distribute 2 +1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 target creatures you control. So 1 or 2, it's, if you put it on 2, because of its own effect, you know, if you put 1 +1/+1 counter on 2 different creatures, they become 4 total. Or I guess you could put both of them on the same creature and it'd still become 4 total. Because this is actually twice, unlike the water crystal, which was just +4. I don't remember so there's doubling season, but there's versions of doubling season that is just for counters. I don't remember off the dome what they are. I think they're around this mana value, so from a commander standpoint, I think this is just a slam dunk if you're in some sort of +1/+1 counters matter strategy. You get the benefits of this being sort of a not ruby medallion, emerald medallion. A benefit of it being an emerald medallion of all your green spells costing 1 generic less to cast. Plus you have the, you know, +1/+1 counters doubling on it, plus it itself, you can spend some mana, and the fact that you're in green, you probably have excess mana to go around. So this isn't the most efficient way to do it, but if you just need some way that your counters doubler also being able to put counters on things. I think it's pretty much a slam dunk for green-based counters matter strategies in Commander. In Standard, there are a lot of cards that care about counters or add additional counters or what have you. Again, like all the other crystals, being 4 mana is pretty heavy, is a pretty heavy investment. In Standard, there's a ton of other options that you have. They aren't going to double the amount of counters that you're getting on creatures, but it'll give you like an extra +1/+1, or just adds a +1/+1 at cheaper, and you don't really need to go way over the top in the Standard to get your creatures big enough to be big threats. So again, probably outside of the realm of Standard here, but I think an absolute slam dunk for Commander. And I've said before, can't really tell you much about FF3, so we can't really give you the reference here, other than the fact that this is one of the crystals that you find in FF3. Quina Coup Gourmet. For 2 and a green, we get a legendary creature, Coup. I think it's Coup. It might be Q. Again, this was before they added voice acting to the Final Fantasy games, so I don't think I've ever heard somebody explicitly say how you pronounce that. But they're an uncommon, a 2/3. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus a 1/1 green frog creature token are created instead. And then you can tap 2, or you can pay 2 generic and sacrifice a frog to put a +1/+1 counter on Quina. An interesting card. There is a frog there. It never really took off, but in Bloomburrow there were frog synergies in Simic, and so this sort of adds to your froggish synergies going on there. 3 mana for a 2/3. We talk about Unstoppable Slasher. That's the Unstoppable Slasher stats. Quina's not returning if it dies, but just getting an extra frog on top of whatever other tokens that you get, you can build an army pretty fast, and especially if you have any sort of frog synergies. I think Valley Might Caller, the 1 mana green creature that gets a +1/+1. I believe that cares about if another frog entered the battlefield. Mostly you see it played in rabbits decks, because I know it cares about rabbits. But I think frogs is also an option there. So I think some people are going to jam this card. I don't know how good it's going to end up being. But I think it's borderline. If you're a frog deck, a deck that cares about frogs in Commander, absolutely going to slam this. I'm trying to think. I think Glarb cares about 4 mana value and higher. And I think Helga also cares about 4 mana value and higher. So maybe it doesn't fit into those, but there's like Clement and stuff like that that also care about frogs. So might fit into those versions, those decks more than like Glarb or Helga, but perfectly fine card. Not much else to say here. Again, I don't know how much token synergies there's going to be in limited. Off the dome, I can't think of a ton there, but this is, if there ends up being token strategies, you can use this in those in those decks. Might be signpost for something like that. Creates additional fodder for sacrifice strategies. You'll have to see at when the full set gets released on how good Queen is going to be in standard, because I think you have to hit some synergies with it, with them to be able to really know. Next up we have Zaz Catsroy for 3 and a green. Oh, sorry, I forgot to talk about the reference here. Queen is a party member in your party. A very eccentric character, a chef. See, with the big knife there. Kind of blue mage-ish member of your party. You sort of eat a weakened enemy in order to learn its spells, if it has any that you could learn, so that you can use it later. Like, very similar to other blue mages in Final Fantasy. Back to Zaz. For 3 and a green, we get a legendary creature, Human Pilot, at rare. Zaz is a 3/3 that when it enters, you may search your library for a bird or basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. And whenever Zaz attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. So similar-ish effect that you get from the Earth Crystal, but only for a single thing. And it has to attack, but it is a creature, so you are technically impacting the board more with Zaz than with the Earth Crystal. Also has an ETB, so you can search for mana fixing. It's going into your hand, it's not ramping, but you can also just search for a bird. Always said keep in mind your sort of bird synergies. 4 mana for a 3/3 though. Probably too weak to see play here in standard. Dodges a lot of the removal, but does die to nowhere to run. Maybe sees play in a bird deck. Not a bird himself, but searches for a bird, so you can search for Bartz and Boko. You can search for Choco. You can search for his Chocobo, which is a card in and of itself. And his a lot of Chocobos have, well, at least his Chocobo has +1/+1 counter synergy, so you can search. The thing that they're probably wanting you to do is play Zaz to find his Chocobo, put it into play a land, get a +1/+1 counter on the Chocobo, attack with Zaz, put another +1/+1 counter on the Chocobo, and then double it, and then the Chocobo gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's really the game plan that they're wanting you to do. Is that more cute than good? I don't know. I think it's probably more cute than good. Probably don't need to play Zaz in your bird deck, but borderline. As far as commander goes, if you are in birds in some sort of commander deck, this is just a tutor for a bird. Your best, whatever is the best bird for the situation. That's obviously going to be pretty good. And then if your bird deck has +1/+1 counter synergy, then world's your oyster with Zaz here. Probably not a good commander. Probably better in the 99, but never know. As far as reference goes, I didn't play a ton of 13. I got like maybe 4 hours in, and I was still in what felt like the same corridor, and I then returned it to GameStop. So wasn't a huge fan of 13. But I know Zaz is a party member who is you get very early on in the story, who I forget whether it's La C or False C or CF. He has to do something in order, like the rest of the members of your party, to try and prevent themselves from becoming an evil version of whichever one of those three that we just talked about. On to the next, we have Summon Titan for 3 green. We have an enchantment creature, Saga Giant, at rare. Titan is a 7/7 reach that has reach and trample. So just on stats alone, 5 mana, 7/7 reach and trample. That's decent. But it is kind of a big green idiot. So what else do we have here? And the fact that he's going to go away, given the fact that it's a summon. Hopefully the effects of the saga make up for it. So let's read what we have here. When ETBs, you mill 5 cards. Okay. Then on the turn that it can attack, return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So kind of a Lumra-ish effect on Titan. And then until end of turn, when for its ultimate, for its final chapter, until end of the turn, another target creature you control gains trample and gets +X/+X, where X is the number of lands that you control. So this is clearly some. The hope is you play Titan and you'll end the game on your turn 3 there. 5 mana is pretty expensive. I think Lumra, which is one of the elemental aspects, elemental beasts of Bloomburrow, I think also is 5 mana, but it ETBs and returns all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. It also itself is affected by the number of lands. You know, its power and toughness is affected by the number of lands that you have in play. So the obvious benefit here with Summon Titan is it's self-fueling, whereas Lumra, I believe you have to build, you have to fuel your graveyard in other ways. There aren't a ton of fetch lands in standard. There's Fabled Passage, and then there's the bad fetch lands like Evolving Wild, etc., etc. So you're mostly going to get your fuel by milling yourself. There already is Aftermath Analyst in standard. That itself is, like a 1/3 that you have to sacrifice in order to get all your lands back. So here you have a big body that is doing, that is helping that along, kind of like what Lumra does here. I think this is borderline. The obvious hope is that you mill 5, you get a couple of lands, you bring them all back, you get this big ramp, and hopefully you have another creature there to sort of take the reins from Titan and finish the job. And then if not, if you weren't able to finish the job there, then at least you got a bunch of ramp, and maybe you can play like an Ugin or something like that. I think it's close. in some sort of like green ramp deck or green. Yeah, no, it'd have to be green ramp. I was gonna say green mid-range, but this isn't really a mid-range card. Is pretty vulnerable to removal. It itself dying. Can I really fault Titan more than any of the other summons? I think mostly because this is just big idiots. You know, it itself is a big idiot. And it's just making something else a big idiot. It does give trample. He himself has trample. He himself has reach. Reach is pretty important in standard right now. Being a 7/7 is pretty good. It means your opponents, this is able to cleanly block your opponent's Archfiend of the Dross, your opponent's demon token that they make from unlocking the other half of, I think it's called Ritual Chamber, the other half of Unholy Annex. Cleanly blocks Bloodletter of Aclazotz. So that's all pretty nice. It's gonna go away, so it's not gonna be there forever, but you know, it's got a decent amount going for it. I could see this seeing standard play in Lumra decks, possibly replacing Lumra. Don't know for certain. I haven't played Lumra decks myself, so I don't know if there's something else going on with Lumra that is much better than what's going on with Summon Titan. As far as the reference, this is the 15 version of Titan. I haven't played much of 15 or seen much of 15, so I can't really tell you a ton on here. Interesting. I feel like 16's Titan is pretty iconic, and 14's Titan, at least for me as a 14 player, is very iconic. But I haven't played 16, so I don't know how iconic. Oh, sorry, I haven't played 15, so I don't know how iconic 15's Titan is. Speaking of 16, we have Torgal, a fine hound. For 1 and a green, we have a legendary creature, Wolf, at uncommon. Torgal is a bear, aka it's a 2/2. Whenever you cast your first human creature spell each turn, that creature enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it for each dog and or wolf you control, and Torgal taps for 1 mana of any color. I think this is pretty playable. So Land Elves is in standard. 2 mana Dorks don't see a ton of play. There is, I forget the name of the card from Bloomburrow. It's a 2 mana dork that taps for any color, just like Torgal does, but it has Offspring for 2 additional. So you draw this later, you get a little more significant of a bump. That one also has, you can tap it and just put a +1/+1 counter on it, so it self grows. Here, you're gonna want to have some sort of synergy with playing humans or playing additional dogs or wolves. As far as playable dogs and wolves, I didn't do any looking up on that, so I don't know. I don't know how far you can go in on this in standard to get a bunch of +1/+1 counters on humans that you put into play. I think In standard, just Torgal is probably fine, but it's going to take somebody to really look at all the dogs that are in play or in standard and all the humans that are in standard. I could see Torgal being very playable as long as there are some good humans to go along with it, which there almost certainly are, but don't quote me on that because I didn't do any search here. Interesting that this is a cast trigger and not an ETB. So even if your opponent, on the turn that you play, so you go Torgal, turn 3, land drop, cast a 4-drop, that is a human, your opponent won't be able to kill Torgal in response to prevent the +1/+1 counter from being added to the human that was cast, which is pretty interesting. I think commander wise, any sort of wolf deck, any sort of human and wolf deck, human and dog deck, absolute slam dunk. You do have to have both that synergy going on here. I think there was a Bant commander from either Karlov Manor or New Capenna that was kind of like a Scooby-Doo thing going on there. I'm sure this fits right into that deck. But yeah. As far as who this is, it is Torgal. It's your, wolf companion for Clive. You can see Clive in the background there, who is the main character of FF16. FF16 is very heavily inspired by Game of Thrones, so this is basically the direwolves from one of the direwolves from Game of Thrones. Same idea. It's a big wolf, super intelligent, all that stuff. Fights alongside you in combat, and an all-around good boy. I think this is the last card that we have here, and when I last looked at the spoiler list, they only had it in Japanese, so I'm going to pull up Scryfall over here so that I can read exactly what it says. But this is Genova, according to Scryfall. The translation is Genova, Ancient Calamity. For 2 black and green, we get a legendary creature, Alien. It says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to Genova's power onto up to 1 other target creature. That creature becomes a mutant in addition to its other types, and then whenever a mutant you control dies on your turn, draw cards equal to its power. And it's a 1/5 at rare. So we talked about Innkeeper's Talent in relation to like Gruul Mice or whatever. This doing a very similar thing to that, but for 2 extra mana. There is also the but also in Golgari instead of Gruul, but Innkeeper's Talent is only in green, so you could play it in this deck as well. As well, in Golgari, there's the Golgari Siege, that whenever a creature attacks, one of the choices that you have is whenever a creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. It gains menace until end of turn. That's only for 2 mana compared to 4 mana here. The obvious benefit here is if you can pump Genova, then the number of +1/+1 counters that you're putting on a creature gets significantly higher. So if you're able to put a couple, if Genova herself, I'm gonna say herself, can't pump herself with her own beginning of combat trigger. So you can't just spend like 1 turn or 2 turns putting the counters on Genova and then start switching over to something else. You have to have some other way to put counters on Genova. But if you're building a deck around this sort of +1/+1 counter synergy, it's probably not going to be that hard to increase the power of Genova specifically. 4 mana for a 1/5 is pretty weak. The obvious benefit here is you're turning things into mutants. Lore-wise, you're infecting things with Genova cells. And then you get to draw, if ever a mutant dies, during your turn, you get to draw cards equal to its power. The big problem there is during your turn. So it's you're kind of giving the things that you made into mutants kind of protection during your turn. If Genova's able to stay around, and if you're swinging with this other big creature, your opponent's going to be very disincentivized to do instant speed removal on that creature, because then you get a big burst of card draw. But they could just spin that removal on Genova, who itself is, at least according to the translation here, is an alien and not a mutant herself. So the way to guarantee that you get that card draw is some sort of sacrifice synergy. You play Genova with Sephiroth. You get to sacrifice something that you made into a mutant. You get the card draw from Sephiroth, as well as the card draw from it being a mutant. Also, probably something to note is we're likely going to see mutants when we get to the Spider-Man set. So this might be something to keep in mind as we go further into the year. I did a quick look through this morning for creature type mutant. I think there are only like 4. One of them, I think, had either saw some play or had potential to see some play, but I don't remember off the dome what it was. So if mutant becomes a type, I know in like mutant is a type for like the Marvel Commander that you got from Secret Lair. So if you can sort of make some synergy going on with there, then that can be good. Which is why I'm thinking about the Spider-Man set in a couple sets from now, bringing out Genova whenever your Venom. Genova and Venom on the same board. Ugh, kill me. But, you know, something to think about for that. But I think that there's just too many moving parts that you're having to do here. And if you're just looking for a way to reliably put +1/+1 count, a single +1/+1 counter on creatures you control, there's much cheaper ways to do that. Let me double check. Oh no, we do have a couple more. Let me see how many more we have left when we're looking at this. Oh no, we actually have maybe 6 or 7 more. So let me get a drink of water real quick. So, next up, Joshua Phoenix's Dominant. For 1, a red and a white, we have a legendary creature, human noble wizard. Who is at rare and is a 3/4. Note, wizard. Wizard's a relatively important type in this set. Also note, 3 mana, 3/4. Pretty good body, avoids most of the, conditional removal in standard right now. The most popular conditional removal in standard right now. When Joshua enters, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. Basically the same. I think it's the exact same text as Tursa Light Shatter. You only get to draw as much as you decide to discard, so you can't just. It's not just draw 2, nor if you have an empty hand after you play Joshua, are you going to be able to draw cards from Joshua. So that's a bit of a bummer. And then for 3, a red, a white, and tap, you can exile Joshua. And return to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. Activate only as a sorcery. So front half of Joshua. Pretty vanilla. But is a decent body. And lets you, cycle through a couple cards in your hand. Gets rid of excess land drops that you don't need anymore. Seen arguments about this for something like Jessica Oculus, and especially when we look at the back half for Jessica Oculus, it starts making much more sense. If we just look at the front half and compare it to the other Jessica Oculus options at 3 mana, obviously Abhorrent Oculus, you're not getting rid of that. So it's, am I playing Joshua instead of Tursa? I think Tursa in general is better than Joshua. If we're just thinking about the front half, Tursa in general is better than Joshua. Tursa has haste, and haste works really well with Proft's eidetic memory, which is sort of the other half of the Oculus puzzle, where game plan 1 is I'm trying to get an Oculus into my graveyard quickly so that I can helping hand it out early and overwhelm my opponent with the board advantage that an early Oculus gives you. But sometimes you end up going with the plan of Proft's eidetic memory, where you're getting +1/+1 counters onto a creature based off of the number of cards you drew after the first one. So Tursa has the exact same, enters, discard up to 2, draw that many. So you play Tursa with a Proft's already on the battlefield from turn 2. Discard 2 cards from your hand, draw 2, put the +1/+1 counters immediately on Tursa, and immediately swing for 5. Whereas Joshua doesn't have haste, so you can do the same thing and turn it into a 5/6, but you don't get that out of nowhere hit for 5 that can be pretty scary from the Oculus player. So, what's the back half? If you flip it, again, that costs 3, a red and a white, plus tapping it. You can turn it into Phoenix, Warden of Fire. It is a legendary enchantment creature, Saga Phoenix. So both the front half and the back half are legendary, so you can't have multiple of these. But again, Tursa is also legendary, so the first 2 chapters, so it's a legendary enchantment creature, Saga Phoenix. It's a 4/4 with flying and lifelink. That's pretty good. As far as a body goes. The first 2 chapters are Rising Flames. Phoenix deals 2 damage to each opponent. It's the Phoenix dealing the damage, so on immediate flip, you're hitting your opponent for 2 and gaining 2, since Phoenix has lifelink. Then the next turn that it's in play, as long as it's still on the battlefield, and since it's a 4/4, it's dodging most everything, you're dealing 2, gaining another 2, and swinging for 4. Potentially it itself dealing a total of 6 damage and you gaining 6 life on that turn, that second turn that you had it in play. And then this is the one where why people are like, this fits into Oculus very well. So for its ultimate, for its last chapter, Flames of Rebirth, return any number of target creature cards with total mana value 6 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, exile Phoenix, then return it to the battlefield face up. So obviously, Abhorrent Oculus is a 3 mana value card. If you have multiple Abhorrent Oculus, then this brings all of them back at once. Even if you don't have multiple Abhorrent Oculus, you probably have other creatures in the graveyard because you are drawing and discarding all over the place in your Oculus deck. And your mana value for your creatures don't go above 3, so you should be able to bring back a number of things at once. Granted, we have to think of when this is happening, right? This is turn... You had to get to turn 5, flip it. Chapter 1, turn 6, chapter 2, turn 7, chapter 3. To get to Phoenix, Warden of Fire. So, sort of late game inevitability, late game play. The deck already did pretty well in the late game because you have so much of this card draw, because you have this threat of bringing back an Abhorrent Oculus and just immediately giving yourself this huge board presence. But this is obviously a huge effect for Jeskai Oculus. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think for why it doesn't specifically fit into Jeskai Oculus. So I already talked about why I don't think that it replaces Tursa, because the haste on Tursa is very, very powerful. I also don't think that it replaces, I forget the name of the card, but it's the 3 mana 2/2 flying vigilance creature that when it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards and then discard 2 cards unless you discard either an instant, sorcery, or creature with flying. So that card, it's draw first, then discard. So if you're trying to go through the Oculus plan, then that lets you search 2 cards into your deck for an Oculus off the top to then put into your graveyard. Whereas both Joshua and Tursa, because Tursa has the same issue, if the Oculus was on the top 2 cards of your deck, now it's in your hand, and now you have to figure out a way to get it into the graveyard or hope that you have enough cards in the graveyard to cast the Oculus normally. The other big thing with Joshua is if you flip Joshua, like all of the dominants, all of the dominance transforming, because they're turning into these saga creatures and they have to enter the battlefield in order to get that first lore counter, they exile themselves. So if you're on the Profts plan, Joshua is not a great target for the +1/+1 counters from Profts, even though he himself fuels those +1/+1 counters. So, because, okay, I put the 2 +1/+1 counters, great, I'm a 5/6 creature. I don't have haste, so I'm not getting in immediately. I don't have flying like the other, like the blue card, which has flying and vigilance. And if I ever want to not cash Joshua in, but activate the other half so that I can start doing the whole Phoenix thing, like, because maybe I need to regain some life or whatever, all those +1/+1 counters that you put onto Joshua go to waste because Joshua exiles and then returns. And even on the other side, on the Phoenix side, when you reach Chapter 3, you exile Phoenix and then return to the battlefield face up. So you're always gonna... It's not a great target for putting the +1/+1 counters on it with Profs. You can obviously just say, hey, this game, I'm not gonna flip Joshua, so I'm gonna put the counters on Joshua and it's gonna be fine. Or you can just be fine with losing the +1/+1 counters on Joshua because you think that the Phoenix side is more important for the game state. But it is something to consider if you're thinking about using Joshua in replacement for either Tursa or for the 3-mana flyer. I would like to see Joshua in some sort of just Boros mid-range-ish deck. Something that's going to get its creatures in the graveyard, not by fueling itself, but just, you know, through normal combat, your opponent trying to kill things and whatnot, and then you play Joshua, and eventually it sort of acts as kind of a Raise the Past or a Dewdrop Cure, something along those lines to bring back a huge board later on. So I think Joshua is pretty good. I don't think that he fits cleanly into Jeskai Oculus. Folks that play Jeskai Oculus more than I do are almost certainly going to test him out, but just upon my initial impression, I would argue that the existing options are better, but maybe the inevitability and the big swing that you get if you can get to turn 7 with the flipped Phoenix is just so powerful that it overcomes the shortcomings that I'm talking about. But as far, cool thing to hear, so Joshua Phoenix is dominant. Joshua is the heir to the throne of, I forget the name of the kingdom that you're in. Is the Phoenix is dominant. This is something you learn very, very early on in the game. There's more spoilery-ish stuff later on that this is kind of depicting, so don't look too closely at this. But it's nice that we see a dominant from FF16 that is borderline playable. I think that the two that we've seen so far, Jill and Clive, not really making it in standard. As far as Commander goes, this is kind of just like a generic good stuff card. I don't know whether or not that's gonna do too much in Commander. You'd have to see. Next up, we have Sarah Farron. For 1, a green and a white, we have a legendary creature, Human Citizen, at rare. She is a 2/2 with first legendary creature spell you cast each turn, costs 2 less to cast, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 2 or more other legendary creatures, you may transform Sarah Farron. So I feel like I might have talked about this the last time, but it's in my list of cards that I haven't talked about yet, so we'll still talk about it. 3 mana for a 2/2, dies to basically every common removal spell in standard. The effect is pretty nice. Should note that you cannot double spell with this to get like a 4-drop legendary, because Sarah herself is a legendary creature. So the turn that you play Sarah, you've already played your first legendary creature spell that turn. So very important to note in that scenario, in that particular scenario. Then being able to flip her, given how legendary packed Final Fantasy is, and particularly Selesnya. Selesnya is very legendary packed. There were Selesnya Legends, Selesnya Aggro, Selesnya mid-range lists on the fringes of standard already, so it's probably not going to be that difficult to flip her. We don't know what the other side is yet. We're evaluating just on this front half. I think on the front half, if she can live for a turn, she can be pretty powerful. Any 2 mana cost reduction, even if it's only a 1-shot 2 mana cost reduction, can be pretty darn good. But the problem is she dies to a stiff breeze. So if she happens to live long enough to flip over, what does she turn into? Crystallized Sarah, which is a legendary artifact, which still has the first legendary creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 generic less to cast, and then it's sort of a double anthem. Legendary creatures you control get +2/+2. So a double anthem is pretty nice. We have in standard that came from Foundation, Anthem of Champions in Selesnya, which is for a green and a white, you get +1/+1 to all creatures you control rather than specifically legendaries. Are the hoops that you have to jump through of playing a creature that dies to a stiff breeze enough to have some sort of legendary beatdown Selesnya deck? Maybe. If she lives, if she flips, this is a big effect for a relatively cheap cost. But there's a lot of ifs in that statement. And the fact that you can't double spell and get the second legendary creature cost reduction is a pretty rough one for her playability. Outside of standard, I think that she is like in commander or whatever. There's gonna be plenty of. I'm sure she fits very well in some sort of Selesnya legendary deck. But I think standard is gonna be pretty tough for her to be able to do enough to survive and flip over. Now I understand. So somebody mentioned somebody was talking about the previous card, the Joshua card, being a good card for the to go into the FF6 precon, and absolutely 3 power, so gets reanimated by Terra, and most of the other creatures in that deck are relatively cheap. Terra mostly cares about power, but the precon itself, you've got a lot of relatively cheap creatures. So if you get the if you flip Joshua over, you'll probably be able to bring a bunch of creatures back from the graveyard that way. So yeah, probably a cool upgrade for the FF6 precon if you bought the precon and buy a couple packs of the main set and happen to pull a Joshua. Good looking out. Next up, we have Titus Blitzball Star. For 1, a white and a blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Warrior, at uncommon. Interesting that main set Titus is uncommon. But he is a 2/1. Whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Titus, and whenever Titus attacks, tap target creature an opponent controls. So let's start with the bad. 3 mana for 2/1, just like we talked about Sarah, dies to a Stiff Breeze. Every common removal spell in the format, even the conditional removal spells, hit Titus. Is also legendary, so you can't have a bunch of Tituses on the battlefield, which would be very good if you could, because whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on Titus. So, like, you could put Titus in like a Simulacrum Synthesizer deck, but you're not really going to put him in the Simulacrum Synthesizer deck. Doesn't get hit by Battlefront or anything like that. But there are Azorius game objects, Azorius Bunnycorn, Azorius artifacts lists that are about like sort of small ball artifact stuff. You're playing Novice Inspector, you're playing Spyglass Siren, you're playing like Nesting Bot, stuff like that. You can play a bunch of small artifacts or things that generate artifacts, because it doesn't care about it being non-token. So, and very quickly grow Titus to be very large. And Titus clears the way whenever he starts attacking by tapping down, well, you know, whatever is the scariest blocker your opponent has. If they've got a Shieldred, they've got a Preacher of the Schism, something that's got Death Touch, something that's gonna you know, ruin your day for your Regal Bunnycorn or Titus himself, well, Titus clears the way for that. So I think Titus can be good. It would be better if Titus was a 2/2, because then you could go turn 4, play Titus, play Novice Inspector, or play Nesting Bot, or some 1-mana creature that's either an artifact creature itself or generates an artifact token, and then immediately gets out of burst lightning range. The fact that it's a 2/1 means that even in that scenario, if your opponent wasn't holding up mana, but they untap and then have mana for that removal spell, Titus is still going to get owned there. But if you have some other additional way to generate a token, you'd have to be in green. But like if you've got Sentinel of the Nameless City or something like that, that on attack generates a map token, some other way to generate tokens on your side, you can really get Titus growing pretty quickly. And there already is a deck that synergizes pretty well with what Titus is doing, so I could see Titus seeing play. Who is Titus? Arguably the main character of Final Fantasy X. You can argue that Yuna is the main character of Final Fantasy X. Blitzball Star gets taken away from Zanarkand by Sin, and a lot more happens after that. Not going to spoil too much unless it's required to talk about when we're talking about a card. I believe this is the last one that we have. No, again, I'm wrong. Not the last one that we have. We've got this. We've got 4 more. So we finally get our Buster Sword. They teased the fact that Buster Sword was coming in the PAX panel. So we finally get what it actually is. For 3 generic, we get an artifact equipment at Mythic. Equipped creature gets +3/+2. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to that damage without paying its mana cost, and has an equip cost of 2. Obviously a extremely powerful set of effects. It's supposed to remind you of the sword cycle from Magic's history. You get some power and toughness increase. You get 2 sort of effects whenever you deal combat damage to a player. For this one, it's draw a card and cast something from your hand for free, as long as it was less than whatever you dealt damage to your opponent. I think the big problem here is there are, I think when I looked, it's either 3 or 4 cards that are of the sword cycle in standard right now that don't see play at all. Like, not even like fringe play. They don't see play at all. And this doesn't give protection, which most of the other sword cycle does. They'll give protection from one of 2 colors, or there's the one from Big Score, which gives like protections from instants and sorceries. But the ones that give protection from a color means that if you're happening to line up with, if the protection that you have happens to line up with the color of your opponent's deck, then you're pretty reliably going to be able to swing in and get that combat trigger. Here, we don't get any sort of trample, we don't get any sort of flying, any sort of evasion, so we have to attach this to something that either already has that, or there's some other relatively cheap way to do that. More to the point, there's not really time to set up for the swords in current Magic. Like I said, there are at least 3 other swords in current Standard that see 0 play, and they all have pretty good effects. You can argue whether or not this one has better effects than those, but they have good enough effects that if people were able to, you know, realistically trigger them, then they would probably see some play. The clear want from Wizards of the Coast is you play Cloud on turn 2, you search for the Buster Sword, you play Buster Sword on turn 3, but it doesn't auto-equip. So you gotta wait till turn 4 before you can actually equip it to Cloud. Cloud is a 2/1, so just like with Titus, dies to a Stiff Breeze. I worry that on whether or not this is gonna see any play for a card that's clearly like a chase mythic in the set. As far as outside of Standard, Commander goes, the sword cycle sees play all over Commander. So it's going to find a home in Commander. And being able to get that combat trigger even without the protection, your pod, somebody's going to be behind, or somebody's going to be playing not that many creatures or something like that. You'll be able to get that swing in and get that trigger much more reliably than you would in Standard. It's cool what they're going for. It's Buster Sword, make it like one of the sword cycle, but I think it's been quite a while since we've seen playable swords in Standard, and I don't think this makes it, which is unfortunate. Next up, we have Instant Ramen. For 2 generic, we have an artifact food at common. It's got flash. When this artifact enters, draw a card. And then you can pay, it's a food, so you can pay 2, tap it, sacrifice it to gain 3 life. Nothing really to write home about here. It's instant speed, colorless card draw, you know, has some artifact synergy for decks that might care about artifacts. Not really Standard playable. As far as the reference here, in Final Fantasy 15, there literally was a collaboration with Nissan, the Cup of Noodles company. Funny that translated through the lens of Magic the Gathering, they found that collaboration with Nissan iconic enough to include, but either they couldn't get the collaboration themselves, or decided to not pursue it because it might feel out of place. We're in the world of Universes Beyond. Is it really out of place to put literal product placement in Magic the Gathering at this point? I don't know. You could argue that there have been some number of cards printed in Magic's history that have had like IDW product placement as part of its set symbol. The original Mana Crypt was a card that you could only get from ordering the books. Now, technically, for ordering the books, that's something from Wizards of the Coast themselves, so not like another company for product placement there. But you squint, and it's not that hard to already see to already see product placement in Magic the Gathering. There was a set of cards related to the movie The Sorcerer's Apprentice, a Nicolas Cage movie that nobody remembers. Literal product placement. And obviously all the Secret Lair stuff, or things like the D&D movie. Sure, that's D&D. But like Hatsune Miku or Fortnite, that's all product placement. So I think it's probably they just didn't get the deal with Nissan to to include to call it actual cup of noodles. Next up, we have the Poo Poo UFO. For 2 generic, we have an artifact creature, Construct Alien. So another alien. Interesting. That's probably going to play into the very next set after Final Fantasy. But it's at uncommon, it's an 0/4 with flying. And you can tap to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. And you can also pay 3 generic, and so that until end of turn, this creature's base power becomes equal to the total number of towns you control. Towns are a subtype of lands. We've seen a couple of them. We know that there are going to be well, we don't know that if we don't have a guarantee, but they did spoil one of them, the Boros tap land town, so it's almost certainly that there's going to be a whole cycle of 10 towns that enter that tap for one of 2 colors and enter the battlefield tapped. So some sort of town synergy card. We've seen Town Greeter be a town synergy card. This is a town synergy card. There are, you know, towns of other rarities, so they're probably going to do something Gates-ish going on with the town stuff, given that we see this card here, Poo Poo UFO, and things like Town Greeter and whatnot. Are they going to go as hard into it as we saw with Gates and Caves? Remains to be seen. If they do go that hard into it, both Gates and Caves were semi-viable strategies, especially like an F&M level for those decks. So keep an eye out. It might be something that you could put together, especially if they give you some sort of sweeper that cares about the number of towns that you have. I don't know how that would fit into Final Fantasy, but they could find a way. Other than that, I mean, this isn't terrible. Kind of land rampish, repeatable land rampish, double trigger, landfall. Mostly here for limited, but there's a world where you play this in standard. Speaking of towns, we have seen over the course of spoiler season, we have seen 4 of the 5 colors of rare adventure lands. This is our red one. I think we are only missing the black rare adventure land that also happens to be a town. This one is Lindblom Industrial Regency. It is a land town at rare. For the land side, it enters into the battlefield tapped, and it taps for red. So, if we completely ignore the adventure side, awful. So you really have to be like, okay, is what's going on the adventure side? So Mage Siege for 2 and a red, we get an instant adventure. So create a 0/1 black wizard creature token with, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this token deals 1 damage to each opponent. So create an instant speed way to create any those wizards that we've seen show up in a number of places, typically related to Final Fantasy IX cards, which is what this is representing. This is one of the major towns in Final Fantasy IX. This is where Cid lives in Final Fantasy IX. There was a Final Fantasy XIV related card that created these wizards, but mostly it's Final Fantasy IX stuff because it's making those black mage puppets. Of the Adventurelands, I was saying Ishgard was the most playable. I think this might be more playable than Ishgard. It's close. Are you going to play this in any deck that generally wants to be playing something on turn 1? So are you going to play this in, is it prowess? Absolutely not. 0% chance you're playing this in Is It Prowess. So you're having to go into red mid-rangey decks, which there aren't really a ton. This could go into that fabled Kuja deck that I think is something that I would like to brew around as sort of a Rakdos mid-range deck. This synergizes with Kuja because it creates a wizard. And you're casting a non-creature spell on the adventure side, so you'll be able to trigger any wizards that were already generated by Kuja. But you have to be slow enough to be fine with getting away with playing a turn 1 tap land. And currently red is not fine with that. Outside of Jeskai Control, you know, the Jeskai Shiko decks, they're fine with playing the ETB tap lands. Is this really good enough? Like, is this worth putting more tap lands into your deck to play Mage Siege? I think most people look at this kind of stuff and they're like, well, it's free. It's not really free. You are adding more tap lands into your deck, which means that you are going to, for a non-0% of the time, draw this as the land from the top of your deck when you're looking to turn 5 Shiko to bring back a lightning strike, or sorry, a lightning helix to keep you from dying to your aggro opponent, or bring back a split up to wipe the board, or against control in a control mirror match. Though in a control mirror match, you're not really caring too much about curving out, but you get the idea, right? So it's not free, but the fact this being the cheapest of the bunch does mean that you can play this as its adventure side, you know, mid-ish game, and have this as your backup land drop in some sort of control deck if you don't happen to draw a land from the top of your deck. So probably the most playable, pretty close to Ishgard. in playability. Ishgard's, I think, a better effect than this one, but this one being cheaper means that it's going to be on its adventure. It's going to be out of your hand on an adventure and just available for you later on, more often than the Ishgard side is. So 6 and 1/2 dozen the other there. But I don't think that these are free includes in the same way that people initially jammed like every MDFC imaginable into their standard decks and then realized that, hey, I'm dying to aggro. You have to really think about, is my deck, does this actually work for my deck? And with that, we have reached the end of this stream. Looking over cards. There may have been cards that have been spoiled since I last pulled cards off the internet. We'll save those for the next time I fire up. Probably, unless there is a huge amount of spoilers, probably gonna be another week or so. Might end up just waiting. If it's gonna be another week, the end of spoiler season is not this Friday, but next Friday, so they would have spoiled everything. So might end up just waiting until then, but that's gonna be a lot of cards to talk about. We'll see how I feel. But unlikely to have any more streams this week. Feel like I've caught up. Thank you everybody for stopping on by and watching. Sin for stopping on by, Ian for stopping on by and chatting, and for the folks that were watching and not chatting, you're very welcome as well. Hope you enjoyed my analysis, and hope you've been enjoying the spoiler season for Final Fantasy XIV. So, without much left to say, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time I see you.